I was, yeah. There. Yeah, I got everything here. Highlighted. By the way, I feel like yeah. I think it's pretty sweet. That's what I guess. So, yeah.
You're right, we're spread than the other.
Crazy, crazy bite. Well, yeah, I had a nice lot of repairs on that.
No, it's got your name on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Work wise, real estate.
Yeah, there's nothing to say. And that's what you might be reading in the local press, our rentals are not down.
There's a narrative there.
There's a
A narrative with a purpose, perhaps? Perhaps. Hi, Jeremy.
I don't know. Let's see what the tax receipts. But I mean, it's in the, in the brokers meetings. Everybody says they're off and taking out. I just.
Not your experience.
It's not bad. I mean, we're down 2.5%.
And there was a pandemic, post-pandemic, bump, right? Yeah.
Went way up.
So a crisis does not make, yeah.
At least, I think I'm good at what I do, but not 10 times as good. So I don't know if everybody else is.
Oh, I don't know, baby.
I maybe.
Just anecdotally, I've noticed in the people I chat with all over the country, and even all over the world, everyone's going to Italy now.
Yeah, right.
I can tell you, it's like, everybody's have lunch for 2 or 3 weeks. now.
Here's something that's interesting. We'll probably have it ready. Yeah. I like that. The average lease value of my broker leases only comes about 60%. That's the actual tax receipts that I can.
We've had one family who had a family for 2 weeks. And I've talked to other people in that relation. Knows where you pay taxes or how you register. I'm just telling you because for 15 years you did not know.
Anybody heard from Don?
Nobody.
It's not easy.
Yeah, so I'm just, I'm sure that it was in.
And if you only do it for 2 weeks, which can be in situation.
Is the parking lot?
Yeah.
No, well, even.
But anyway, take that and just going like human condition, you can extrapolate it at lunch.
It's possible.
Disasters. But I just find it interesting.
I mean, there's, I will say that there's color for sure. My name.
It was in the. We're not.
What's interesting is in the past, I know small season. And we're the 1 in 10 houses. It's not denied. Right. One is saying, third. If I take it out of my. Yeah, I know he's trying to. This was 100 people. Yeah. I think there's an instruction, so naturally segregated by. Yes.
Yeah.
I am.
Safety for you in the corner there. Whenever you're ready, we'll start.
No. Talking about some housing.
I'm sorry. So I just. No, yeah, we're gonna start this. Select board to call the order and then. And then I'll turn it over. Yeah, I guess they. I'll give you that.
It's not. That, it's just really too bad.
Okay, so
Go for it.
I'll call the select board meeting to order. And so this, the whole idea behind this came up a couple of years ago when we went to an MMA conference. And I was talking to someone from another town on the Cape about how they do this kind of like quarterly, they get everybody together. And just to kind of talk about the crossovers between the different things that committees throughout their towns are doing. And we obviously spent a lot of time working on our strategic plan. Obviously, the planning board has the master plan, and among other interests that each committee has. So we thought it would be a nice idea to try this and see where we align, where we might have conflict, and just how we can govern the town as a whole in a better way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Enough said.
Thanks. Community plan.
Too many notes.
From the peanut gallery.
All right, I just want to say one thing. We have the owl recording, and for you all in the back, it might not pick you up very well, so just make sure that you are loud enough. Hopefully that this can hear you.
So to use your outside voice, if you're not at the table, So good morning. My name is Julia Novak, and I've had the pleasure of working with the town for a number of years and various iterations of their strategic plan. And Libby and the board asked if I would help facilitate today's conversation among the board. So interested to meet you all and the people that I don't know and find out who's here. Our team includes Julie Giesecke. Julie's a visual facilitator, and she's going to do some captures of today's conversation. And then my colleague Catherine Carter, she and I have been working very closely with Janet Schulte from the town, and Libby, of course, on the strategic plan. So we kind of know the content and understand how the plan and the process has evolved over time. So we're going to do in terms of the agenda. So yes, sorry.
I'm just wondering if the other board should call the order if they've got quorums first.
Anybody have a forum?
FinCom does.
I do, and I see Joe's on, so he can call us to order.
And you've got full on.
Yep. I just meet Joe's the vice chair, so you can call us to order.
All right, I guess I can call the FinCom meeting to order since we have a quorum.
You, Joe. And any other committee?
I'll call to order the meeting of the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission.
Great.
I'll call for a meeting of the Nantucket Planning Board.
Okay. Anybody else got any conservation?
We don't have a
Okay, no quorum, so we're not worried about it. Okay. Would you put the slides on? Thank you. So just in terms of an agenda for today, what we wanted to do was give the select board an opportunity to share with you verbally kind of the plan and its evolution and where it is today. You can go to the next slide, thank you. And then we'll want to hear from the other boards. One of the things that the select board talked about for this meeting was to give you all an opportunity to share what your priorities are. So we kind of created some space for the chairperson or their designee to share your all's priorities. And then we'll go back to the strategic plan and talk very specifically about the different outcome areas, housing, transportation, et cetera. And hear how the activities of the boards and commissions are either supporting or perhaps in conflict with or in tension with some of the priorities of the board. Once we do that, we'll then talk about, well, what might be next. In October, the select board will kind of do a major refresh of the plan. This is kind of in its 5th year. And so we want to hear what you all think might be an important priority for the coming year. But we want to do some just quick introductions and part again. So our team knows who's who and which committee's talking when they're talking. And so if you all would just share your name, the committee or staff position that you have, and how long you've been in that role for us. And if each of the boards would let us know who the spokesperson is going to be, that would be great as well. And anybody can volunteer the person on their right to go second. Okay, we just did that to you, so now we friends.
Mary Longacre, Chair of the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission for less than 1 year at this point.
Thank you, Mary.
Christy Kickham, member at large on the Capital Committee, has been on for about 8 years.
Okay, great. Jen,
Janet Schulte, Strategic and Planning Advisor for the town of Nantucket.
Catherine Carter, Rock Ellis.
okay, Tom, we'll go to you.
Tom Dixon, newest select board member, a little over 2 weeks.
2 whole weeks, all right. And then.
Don Holgate, select board member, 8+ years now,
And chair,
and chair for the 4th time.
4th time, wow. About the 3rd time. Libby,
Libby Gibson, Town Manager, 35 years with the town of Nantucket.
35, did you just say?
Since she was an infant.
Clearly.
Anyways, Malcolm McNabb, select board, 8 months.
Brooke Moore, Select Board, just past a year.
Matt Fee, select board. Got it all on time.
He's always been.
For life.
Joe Planowski, Cannabis Advisory Committee and Conservation Commission, a year each.
Seth Engelborg, Conservation Commission for 4 years and NPNEDC for 1 year.
Will Delerba, I'm the conservation agent. I work for the Natural Resources Department and I've been there since October. I love it.
We'll put all those on our side.
Erica Mooney, I'm the operations administrator for the town administration and 14 minutes.
That's all. Julie, please do the transfer. From here, we'll get you guys at once.
Christy Barantella, I'm member at large of the NPDC, and I've been that for a year. Previously was a select board, but it's 3 years.
Hi,
Hi.
yeah, well, roughly 20 years, various groups, boards, etc. 15, 16 years planning board, planning commission, close to 20. Right away committee 20, teamship 19.
Okay, the guy that likes meetings, clearly.
I'm a simple thinker. Just like to stay involved.
I'm Leslie Snell. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning and I've been with the town.
Andrew Vorst, Director of Planning, 30 years for the town. Dave Iverson, planning for 4 years and PDC for 4 years, Affordable Housing Trust for 4 years. John Trudell, planning board, outgoing chair, new chair, Dave Iverson,
All right.
MPDC, just 8 years.
And Wendy Hudson, I'm an at-large member of the NPDC for 12 years, I think. I also serve on the state's Rural Policy Advisory Commission as the NPDC rep. I also, maybe people don't know, but I'm on the executive board of the Retailers Association of Massachusetts.
Very serious, assistant town manager, been in the role about a year, a little over a year.
Brian Turbett, finance director, 9 years.
Okay, and we'll come back up here. Well, Joanna Roach, I'm on the finance committee for 8 years. Worked to resiliency committee for 2 years, contract review committee for 2 years. Thank you.
Stephen Morey, finance committee for 9 years.
Jeremy Bloomer, Finance Committee, less than 1 year.
All right,
And you've got some people.
and the people online. Can you show there? it is.
I'll jump in. Joe Grouse, Finance Committee, Vice Chair. I've been on the Finance Committee for 9 years.
Thank you, Joe. Others?
Chris Glowacki on FinCom, on and off for the last 5 or 6 years.
Linda Williams on a bunch of stuff for 40 years. On the Concom, Contract Review, Council on Aging, couple other things, Housing Authority.
Great, thank
But
you.
I'm here for the Concom. 2 years.
Okay, anybody else? Barry?
Megan Trudell, land use specialist, working with Plus for about 5.5 years.
Okay.
I'll go, Mike Burns, Transportation Program Manager. I guess I'm 19 years about that. And then I'll maybe pop it to Florencia.
Hi, Florencia Rural Public Outreach Communications Manager now. 6.5 years with the town.
Barry's on.
Yeah, Barry Rector, Planning Board, Planning Commission, and Cannabis Advisory Committee right now for the better part of 23 years and other various boards and commissions over that time.
And we have one member of the public, Rick Average, is on as well.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Well, appreciate the introductions. Greg's here somewhere.
He's hiding.
He's hiding in the back. We're in the overflow section over there, and there's the space right here next to me, but that's. So with that, then we can go to the next slide. I'm gonna ask Libby to kind of just give a little bit of background on the town's strategic plan.
Sure. So the board has been having annual workshops off and on for probably at least 15 years or so. And we've had different facilitators, different formats of plans, different content of plans. And around the 2018 timeframe, we engaged Julia's group to come in and do some facilitation with us. We spent quite a bit of time laying kind of the groundwork for what we wanted in the plan, what the board wanted in the plan. And we developed a plan which has principles of sustainability. And that was like a day's workshop or half a day's workshop to come up with what the sort of theme of the plan was going to be. And we developed strategic focus areas, each of which has an aspirational statement as well as one or more goals associated with them. And the board has been reviewing this annually since about 2018. And town administration is tasked with implementation of the goals. And we just completed what is it called? A resource, what's it called again? Resource requirements assessment to really get at remaining goals. I think we have made quite a bit of progress on a number of goals. Some of them are a bit stalled for staffing reasons. Some of them are stalled for financial reasons, and some of them are just not moving ahead quite yet because of other pending priorities, or there's something that needs to happen before whatever the goal is happens. So was I going to go over the principles?
So yeah, I think that we'll go to the slide that has the principles of sustainability. Yeah, so Libby will do this, and then I don't know exactly who on the board is doing each one, but I know that Brooke is going to start with housing, and so you all can hand it off to one another for each of the 5 areas.
And if there's nobody, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So these principles of sustainability are, I'm not going to read the whole thing, so hopefully everybody has it in front of them. But again, this took quite a while to come up with, and we had areas that the board agreed on and wanted to focus on, and trying basically sustainability obviously is a broad word and means different things to different people, but we tried to just use it as, again, a broad area where all of our efforts are focused on sustaining Nantucket, I guess is what I would say. And that's how the principles were developed, and the principles kind of overflow into the focus areas, which then have the associated goals.
Okay, so let's go to housing.
Sure. needless to say, there's been a lot of work in this area. It's been our #1 priority at the select board level. Before I got there, but a lot has changed in the 6 or 7 years that I've been serving on the Affordable Housing Trust. Really, enough housing for year-round residents and ultimately for seasonal workforce as well is the goal. It's to make living and working on Nantucket attainable and viable for people who we need to make the island function. And support our visitor economy. And so finding that balance and having enough accessible housing at different income levels is the overarching priority. Obviously, in the last 6 or 7 years since I've been working on this, the crisis has deepened. The town is struggling even more to house its workforce. And we've had to really grow our priority list to meet all the increasing needs over time. So I'm just going to run through the goals and just give you a quick update on where I see them. Safe harbor, which is the protection under Chapter 40B, a community is moving toward its 10% requirement apace at 0.5% per year, which for us is 48 units of new SHI listed subsidized housing inventory housing per year until we get to our target number of 490 units or 10%. Just as an aside, we've been waiting since the census, it's now 3 years for our adjusted number. And the state, Tucker was up at DHCD last week and thinks it's going to be about a month before we get our new number, which will likely change. And I'm feeling like it might go up. So that number might go up from 490. So our target may change. But the Affordable Housing Trust has had a very concerted strategic plan to stay in safe harbor on our way to 10%. And we've done that by asking for funding to acquire property and then to schedule out the addition of new SHI listed units to stay in safe harbor. And we have successfully done that since 2019. And have land in place to continue on that trajectory till we get to 490. Town employee housing, clearly this has gotten to be a much bigger issue. Progress we've made includes in union negotiations this year, we have achieved with all the unions that have settled an agreement that they will not grieve the allocation of town-owned and town-sponsored housing amongst themselves. So one of the barriers to solving the town employee housing was if we allocated a unit to someone in DPW, it could be grieved over at the police or fire union. And so we now have language with several of the unions built in. And that will really make creating and allocating housing to town employees a lot less complex. And so that's a huge change. And then we're also looking at town-owned properties for the build out of housing units. There's a plan for lifeguard housing off of Waite Drive that's in process. And so we're looking at those needs. And there's also town-owned lots on Tacoma Way that we're looking at a development plan for those for town employees. And we're also looking into the ability to prioritize town employees in other housing developments that we have in the pipeline. There's a municipal employee preference that's allowed under DHCD, even within SHI listed developments. So we're working with DHCD to determine how to go about prioritizing municipal employees in some of the housing developments in progress. And we're also starting to talk, and this is brand new, with our legislators about an exemption or allowing municipal housing to be considered municipal infrastructure and therefore eligible for other state funding outside of the housing related funding, which is restricted to units under 80% area median income. So we're working every avenue we can to solve the town housing issue, town employee housing. I'm going to go longer. Determining need, we're in the process of developing a data analytics plan to determine supply and demand and the gap in between, the details of that. So we're targeting our work. And then also home ownership, now that we've reached the $6.5 million override that was approved, thankfully, this year at the ballot, we'll have funding to really dig into deed restrictions And importantly, setting aside existing housing stock that's occupied year round as it turns over, subsidizing the purchase and resale at affordable and attainable rates to keep a stock of year-round housing in the year-round community in perpetuity. And that's going to be an important function of our work in the next year. And the trust is forming a deed restriction work group to set those in stone and figure out what those deed restrictions look like. So that's it.
Thank you. So, I really want to kind of move this through. because-
Sorry, Julia.
No, I was not looking at my watch. But we'll have a conversation, after we get this initial piece out. So Matt, were you gonna do transportation?
I guess I was.
And if not, Libby is gonna pinch hit wherever there is a gap, but
I can do it.
sounded like something.
I can do it, yeah, it's easy. The transportation, the statement is on the board and basically just sort of recognizing that Nantucket has no traffic lights. It's different here than the rest of the world. The goal may not be to move more cars more quickly. It's how do we get people out of their cars? How do we find make other options as agreeable or better? And how do we make those other ways of getting around the island safe? Bicycles and things, and some of that seems to be going a little bit the wrong way. There was the accident yesterday, 12:30, the middle of the day, and it was a pretty bad accident. Those guys are moving, so we've got this, so we've still got work to do. The goals, we had launched a downtown parking management system based on demand manager principles, and we've got a couple things done. The license plate readers were purchased and some of that, but it's been a bit on hold because of staffing and sort of other issues. What we tried to do with these goals was make a few that were achievable. Like when we were doing this, there's so much in this space, but there's limited time. And so one of them was to make a one key sidewalk route from the Mid-Island Six Fairgrounds downtown. And we wanted it to be sidewalks and clear sidewalks without cars on them and, et cetera. And, we're getting close. It's sort of, and that was something we thought was achievable. And then shifting the commuter mode of choice from driving alone to using other modes. And I'm not sure where that stands. Maybe Libby can help me on that one, but.
That is sort of dependent on some data that is needed in order to do the analysis of how many people are driving, how many people are commuting, and I don't think we've quite tackled how to get at that yet, but it is definitely on the radar.
And I know that downtown, I'm gonna make a plug for the downtown parking. I know that is a contentious issue. It's, people don't want it to change. They don't want to pay for it, et cetera. But I think it is kind of a key to what we all have to do. And I think it's sort of, I remember when there were people had yards with flowers and nice yards, and now everything's a paved over, parking area. And so, and that's partly because you can park kind of unlimited downtown in a lot of areas, and it locks up all summer. I see it locked up all the way up to the cliff. And we're adding, 100 homes plus a year. Maybe it's going to slow down now, but we've been adding a lot more vehicles, a lot more people at peak, and it's not going to get any better. So I think part of, moving cars down, making cars turn over downtown, and then having money that we raise that will be able to make NERDA more, more frequent, more often, possibly even free. We've got a new hire at NERDA who has hit the ground running and doing great. And I think that, and it sort of hit me the other day. A friend said they had just been down an island, similar size down in Florida. And they said they got there, they had their rental car, they parked it, and they didn't get in it the rest of the time. And they were going to beaches 7 miles away, and everything was family friendly in buses, meeting other families, other people. And I think that kind of vision is where we need to go. I don't think we can count on it the way we're doing it. The other reason we can't count on it is we're going to be losing miles and miles of roads over the next 20, 30 years. So we have to start thinking of how else can we move it so that there's space for the trucks and the cars and the things that have to be done. So it's, I think that's sort of my big vision long term. But we have to take little steps to get there. Thank you.
Are you gonna do environmental or are we tossing it to Libby? Brooke set a really high bar. In terms of detail, so-
I'm sorry, I was scared to go.
I think Malcolm's doing
You're gonna
it.
do it. Oh, good.
I'm not ready today. Next time I will do it.
Okay, next time.
But I have just become the environmental person.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So Libby.
Okay, so the environmental leadership, it has an aspirational statement and that is basically. We're an island and we have to take care of ourselves and we can't wreck it. So there's a lot of things we need to do in order to maintain it, keep it viable for ourselves, our visitors, our future generations. We have a couple of goals associated with environmental leadership. One relates to data-driven recommendations regarding island-wide solid waste management, and we are proceeding down a road there that's been has a effort of a board member, a finance committee member, staff, a consultant. We just were finally able to hire a solid waste manager. So we're moving towards what's going to happen in 2025 when the contract waste services agreement with our landfill operator expires. And there are a lot of emerging technology issues, other trash, solid waste disposal issues to be concerned with, and developments in that area that we're monitoring and learning from. The other goal relates to establishing an island-wide long-term water quality management plan. And that has been developed through natural resources. And it involves ponds, harbors, stormwater, wastewater. And that has been presented to the board and it is out there and it is dynamic. So there are a lot of things, sort of a lot of moving parts with that and different agencies that are involved. But it is definitely a focus within the town. We have specific staff people devoted to water quality.
Efficient town operations. Still new one.
Yeah, okay, no problem. So this one is really kind of town admin oriented anyway, and we're always looking at ways to be more efficient, not just for general operations, but with our boards, committees, and commissions. And one of our big efforts is to develop a facilities master plan. Several years ago, we were discussing the possibility of a central municipal facility at the two fairgrounds site. And at the time, the finance committee wanted to know what's our overall master plan so that we can sort of work in how we're going to do all of this, because there are other facilities that need attention as well. So we have some pretty big ticket projects on the horizon. Some are closer than others, but for example, we've got our island home, senior center, and the central municipal facility, the DPW facility, and there's probably a school out there in our not too distant future. So we developed the facilities master plan. It needs a handler, and the handler is not hired right now. We're having some serious staffing problems with municipal facilities maintenance and management, and we're trying to get a handle on those things. We have a meeting later today about it, in fact. So I'm just going to comment on the central municipal facility. There are a lot of benefits to having a facility like that. Remote departments are not efficient with respect to maintenance. The more you have, the more you have to maintain, the more costly it is. But there's also what's the word I'm looking for? A camaraderie and a collaboration, thank you, that develops when you're all in the same facility together and not all remote. When you can easily talk to somebody down the hall or have a quick meeting in a conference room and not have to drive somewhere for it, that sort of thing. The other goal relates to investing in technology. We invest in technology every year, and we have expanded the IT department and they're all very focused on a lot of different areas. One of the areas we're very focused on right now is cybersecurity, and I'm going to take this opportunity to remind everybody who is on town email, you must participate in the cybersecurity training. It is not optional, it is required. And if you don't do it, and if you put the town at risk, very serious problems can result. And you can look around the country or world any day of the week and see what's happened. It happened at the school over the winter, and they are not out of that yet. So, okay. Rant over on that.
So don't click on anything you don't know.
Don't click on anything you don't know. And sometimes there's a little test for you, and if you get it right, you get to be on the leaderboard. So make that your goal.
Don't.
Yes.
I did it about a week ago. It took about
Thank you.
20 to 30 minutes. It's very easy.
It's
It's
fun.
actually kind of funny in a
Yeah,
certain way.
it is, it actually is kind of funny. So we are working to invest in technology. Do you want me to go on to quality of life or just?
I can.
Okay.
Quality of life.
So quality of life was added after kind of our first round of this plan. And I think the idea here is it's a very subjective thing, quality of life, but to make it a major goal of being inclusive with a very diverse community of, people from all over the world who live here, people who live here year round, people who lived here their whole lives, people who are newer to the island, people who are part-time residents, and try to come to what are the best ways to serve all of these people and to have it be a healthy environment. And I mean, so much of it comes back to the housing and the environment and the transportation. And because I would say the number one complaints on this island are traffic, are housing. And it just completely all plays into people's happiness and people's ability to kind of survive and thrive here on the island. So again, it's a bit subjective on how you get at it, but I think we're working towards it. Is that fair?
Yeah, the two goals are just up here for folks' reference. The equity, which we've done a lot of work on, and then of course, this, as you were talking about, making sure everyone has access to all the things that make a difference. Okay. All right, so that was the opportunity for the board to just kind of share at a very high level their priorities as expressed in the strategic plan. So we want to give each of the boards or committees that are represented here, the 5, an opportunity to share your priorities. What are the things that you're focused on? And I can't decide if money should go first or last, but I'm leaning towards first. So who's going to be the spokesperson for the finance committee? Is it Joe who's online, Brian?
He's the vice chair, so
He's the
unless
vice
they
chair.
agree to somebody else.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about redelegating to Stephen or Joanna since they're there in the group.
What is the question?
Yeah, what
What are your priorities? What priorities are each of the boards focused on?
well, look,
I have a text message here from Denise Cronow, who's our.
does she tell us what to say?
She
usually does.
So on behalf of the committee, Denise wanted me to share that our priorities will be continued collaboration and investing the time and continued investment of time from all parties, the select board, town administration, planning board, particularly on warrant articles, so that when the finance committee has to make a recommendation, we're fully informed and we don't have to revisit things. Denise felt that this year between town administration and planning, there was some instances of last minute work. And that's, partly due to scheduling of planning board hearings require a significant amount of notice. And there was one, I think, scheduling error. In any case, we got information late. So we only had a single meeting to review, ask questions, and then we were forced to act. But
by and large, Denise notes that things have gotten much better and we've been able to have constructive fact-based debates. So we hope that that continues going forward.
What CapCon, who's the chair here?
Well, I'm not the chair, but I'm the
Okay.
only one here.
Oh, well.
Online or here. Yeah, Joe.
What do you think?
I wasn't expecting to speak, but, as far as the capital committee, I mean, our committee is very review and advisory based. I think a lot of our material that we work on is reliant on the information we get from the departments, which is very important, as well as in coordination with Libby and Brian. Big help. So, we review capital projects, and the big thing for us is also reviewing long-term projects for better planning. It's difficult to price those ones that are far out, but also always good to have them on the radar.
Was it you all that asked for that facilities master plan that was mentioning with CapCon that?
I think FinCom asked for it, but Capcom probably jumped on
Yeah,
it too.
okay. Conservation Commission.
Hello.
Hi.
So neither our chair nor vice chair are here today, so I'll be giving an update on their behalf. The Conservation Commission is a regulatory body. That's our role is to protect natural resources on the island. And specifically, we have jurisdiction over protecting wetland resources, both coastal and inland wetland resources. So we, work with applicants to hear projects and to permit those projects in relation to our protected interests. Currently, our goals are to finalize an update on our regulations. This has been in place for at least 4 to 5 years, and we're very close to adoption of a new regulations. And we also are, another goal of ours is to review our policies and procedures and try to be more efficient. So the Conservation Commission, the Nantucket Conservation Commission, I should say, sees more applications than any other conservation commission in the entire Commonwealth. Out of the 351 municipalities in the state, we have more than double the amount of permits ever. That's actually, I think we're more than 2,000 higher than the next town. So we have a very busy schedule and a lot to deal with. So we're trying to review the policies and procedures and try to see how we can be more efficient in our permitting. And also, I'm glad we're all meeting here today because we often hear a lot of applications that have to go through multiple regulatory boards, planning, zoning, Concom, HTC. And so I'm glad that people are in the room. Maybe it's not the focus of this meeting, but I think a focus of a future meeting could be how can we sort of streamline that review process? Are people always going to a specific board in a specific order? Or how are we sharing information between those boards? Because right now applicants can just apply to whatever board they like to first. And a lot of times the Concom and another board might have differing views on an application and they have to come back to one of those boards. So we're trying to be more efficient in that regulatory process moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Let's do the town planning board then. Planning board?
I'm gonna let Andrew speak for this. He's a little better than I am.
Yeah.
Well, the planning board's major focus is creating a master plan. Master plan is a state requirement. It's the jurisdiction of the planning board. There's 9 specific elements that are all spelled out. Last master plan went to town meeting and approved in 2009. Some of what Brooke mentioned, for example, was the holdup of the census data and other things that delayed that. However, we're still on schedule from 2009 to get that updated. So we will see more work coming up. We're entering into some new contracts. There'll be an extensive public process that will lead to a future article at town. I won't tell you when exactly that is, since I'm not going to be here for that, but I'm certainly going to help in that process getting forward.
How about for NPDC, Mary?
Thank you. The Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission was created by a special act of the state legislature in 1973 at the request of town officials to allow Nantucket to access certain state programs and funding that are only available to RPA. The commission is also designated as a rural transportation planning organization for Nantucket and has a representative on the state's rural policy advisory committee. The commission has 4 primary functions: research, long-range planning, transportation planning, and providing management of the Plus Department through an MOU with the town. The commission is currently considering a more active role in regional coordination. The commission's powers are advisory, unlike the other 12 Massachusetts RPAs, which serve multiple towns. The commission does not possess any regulatory authority. The commission's top priority right now is to review its enabling legislation, mission, membership, and bylaws. We're also working on updating the MOU with the town, as the working relationship has evolved since the agreement was first written in 2012. We have drafted a vision and mission statement, and I'll read those briefly. The vision is a resilient, sustainable, and equitable Nantucket community, balancing economic, environmental, and social factors for current and future needs. The mission statement is to provide leadership, support, and coordination to the Nantucket region by developing plans, policies, programs, and projects that consider the diversity of our demographics, culture, and environment to benefit both the division residents, to serve as an advocate outside the Nantucket region, fostering cooperative efforts with other governmental entities, and to promote public and private efforts to resolve issues, solve problems, meet needs, and explore opportunities whenever and wherever such efforts can benefit from sound regional planning. So those statements are drafts under consideration at the moment. Additionally, we'll be discussing how we fit in with the planning efforts taking place in other departments. Sometimes we are well suited to be in a leadership role, such as for the open space plan on behalf of the Conservation Commission. Sometimes we are better suited to a supporting role, such as providing research or plan review. And sometimes it's best for us to rely, sometimes it's best to rely on and coordinate with expertise present in other organizations, such as with the Board of Health and Natural Resources Department in Reading with regulations. We recognize and applaud that long-range planning is something that's become a widespread responsibility across the town, not something that is our exclusive domain. The evolution of the discussion around housing is an example of an issue that has expanded into wide community and municipal involvement with the creation of the short-term rental work group and the evolution of the housing office from a single position originally in the Plus Department to its now 3-person department. Navigating the transition as Andrew Worth retires from the Director of Planning position and hiring top-tier staff are another high priority. One thing that I've learned in my first year as the chair of NPDC is that the planning department staff are incredibly hardworking, and I commend Andrew and incoming planning director Leslie Snell for creating a productive and supportive working environment and building a highly trained, responsive, and capable staff. I'm also grateful that we've recently been able to hire Rick Burns as our returning transportation program manager. Although we are not an arm of the town, hiring and retention of qualified staff are important because outside of grant-funded activities, the commission relies on the Plus Department for our operational support. Over the next year, the transportation program manager expects to finalize the 5-year update for long-range transportation plan, initiate development of a regional safety action plan as part of the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, coordinate with town officials on a strategic plan and regional planning priorities for parking and single occupancy vehicle reduction, assist in various bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and serve as the project manager for the Palm Rivers Road and Walnut Road sidewalk. The transportation program manager also provides support for the Road and Right-of-Way Committee, traffic safety workers, as well as the bicycle and pedestrian advisory subcommittee, which is particularly interested in the evolving state and local micro-mobility regulations. The commission is participating in the National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 process for proposed offshore wind energy projects, including Vineyard Wind and Sunrise Wind. We're interested in the increasing number of solar installations, both municipal and private. We would be supporting the implementation of the Coastal Things Plan and the development of the Climate Action Plan and other sustainability efforts. The commission has a representative on the Harbor Plan Update Committee, the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust, the Capital Program Committee, and the Human Services Grant Review Committee. We have work groups currently for 2 area plans, which are a new area plan for the town, and an update of the Mattocket area plan, and other neighborhoods are interested in area plans as well. And finally, we look forward to working with the planning board to update the master plan.
That's all you have to say about that. Thank you, Mary. Appreciate that. Do you, Erica, I want to have access to email here, your email here. Kevin's gonna send you another slide. I'm gonna show up on that. If not, we can put it back on the jump drive.
Yeah, you give me about it.
We'll play catch. No catch. We pat this down. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, listening to the different committees, I mean, it's pretty clear how important girls' work is to the priorities that the select board has established. And I think it would be really helpful for us to go through the 5 elements. I just had that conversation, chance for you to ask your question. I appreciate your patience, Joanna. But we'll, kind of engage in conversation around each of the areas and kind of pointing out things that you're doing that are supportive of the goals that the select board has established. And if there's any activities that are in tension with that, I think it would be also important to kind of highlight those as well. This slide that we're going to put up on the board, start to talk slower to kind of delay things so we can make it all happen magically. Usually Catherine's trying to do this slide, but we'll do it on the board. But it just struck me as I was listening, and when it started talking about the comp plan and all of the other plans that you all have, your capital plan, your finance, long-term financial plans for the town. There is a natural flow of things and how they nest and how they interact. And I think we've heard some of that today, but we'll start with housing and just give you all a chance. I know I think, had a question right off the board, but so, what are some things that you all are doing that support? What questions do you have? Is there anything that you're worried about that's in tension with what the board has stated as priority?
That wasn't.
That was. You. Throw it up there. Yeah, please.
So my question really was, what about the $1 million in extra support that we voted on the last year? Because you mentioned the union thing, and so I just wanted to hear how that felt,
I'm gonna toss that to Libby.
Sure. So the $1 million that Joanna is referring to was intended to assist the most rental challenged town employees with their housing costs. And we spent a lot of time trying to work out how exactly we would do that. In the end, it proved to be not something we can figure out. The unions did not support it, number one, and they had a lot of reasons why, and some of them were certainly valid. And just in terms of other housing related issues, just not to go down a whole big road here, but just as a quick example, we met with them in December, I think it was, and reviewed what we were trying to do. We had come up with a way to assist, and it turns out that it wasn't actually going to assist that many people. And there were a lot of questions about, for example, we're not necessarily rental challenged with cost, but our accommodations where we live are terrible. And what is the town doing about that? So that means we need to build housing or secure housing in some manner. So we haven't yet brought the conclusion of this to the FinCom or the board. We're hoping to do that. It's just been a lot of other things going on. And hopefully we're going to be able to somehow, some way reappropriate those funds or reallocate them or repurpose them for another housing related project, perhaps the development of housing on Tacoma, like Brooke was talking about earlier. We talked to the hospital about this too, and I don't know all the details of their program, but one of the things that came up was, why don't we just give everybody $1,000 or something like that? And that really was not where we were going with we wanted to help the people who are the most challenged. And we didn't think giving everybody $1,000 was really getting at what we were trying to do. So we called a lot of other municipalities who have similar problems, and there is no standard for how to do this. So it just was quite challenging, but that's what.
You know, if I might, just kind of point out too, how sometimes, we think we're gonna put $1 million out there, this is gonna really help, it's, it's gonna solve the problem. The reality is, there is a tremendous amount of time that is spent, that from Libby and others, and then trying to resolve how to best use the money. And so this has been, and the housing goal has been really thorny to kind of walk through. Even with the resources the community is willing to provide, there are still constraints that create obstacles for actually resolving some of the issues that you have.
And it also informed sort of the direction that staff and Libby took, sort of, working with the unions to get the grievance languages changed. And there was, there has been a lot of catch up the town did, but part of, so it was, I think that the two came together and worked, it was the right timing for both things. And I think that was, that sort of, it informed us that there was another angle, that another way we had to proceed, and that Libby is proceeding that way, so.
Yes.
Either for maybe Brooke or Libby, as far as how housing's concerned, we hear about, development that might be going in 3 or 4 years, and, with capital committee, we are, forecast based looking out. So is it possible to sort of get it in your head what you need for housing in like 10 years or 15 years, or what, if there is even a resolve to housing, or if we just hit our annual mark as far as what our percentage is that the state allows us or tells us to do?
So I'll take that one. 490 or 10% is a fraction of what we need as a community, and we know that. Most of the information we have to know that is not validated, researched numbers. It's things like Richmond Great Point's waiting list is over 500 families that live here, are vetted as having jobs here and living here, who are searching for housing, who've applied for apartments there. The waiting list at housing, the number of qualified covenant buyers is over 100 at Housing Nantucket. So anecdotally, and with some numbers, now there can be people who are on both lists. Housing Nantucket held a housing summit and brought a wide variety of stakeholders in the housing universe together, from developers to conservationists. Everybody was in the room. And one of the priorities that came out of that was the data analytics project that I mentioned earlier. And that is going to be, and I want to use the phrase public-private partnership, because it's really important that private groups that are working in this arena and the Affordable Housing Trust and Town Administration for Town Employees are all rowing in the same direction, working together. And that data analytics project, I'm hoping, will get executed this year, before the end of the year. And then we used to say we could throw a dart at the board, do anything for housing, and we're solving the problem, because the need is so broad and it runs from home ownership to rental across income levels. And we focused on shy listed housing because that's been the priority to stay in safe harbor. That's the mandate we got from the Neighborhood First funding in 2019. When we get there, what's next? And we can't wait to get there to do the next thing. So one of the reasons we advocated for the override is in order to start with these deed restrictions and capturing some of the units that might fall into seasonal ownership from year-round ownership, and not wait to get to 10% and then start. So that funding will allow us to do that, but that analytics project is going to really help us capture the quantity of the need and to make a long-term strategic plan as to what we do first. And we want to spend that money as quickly as possible, but both efficiently and correctly. And one example I've fall back on is the Cow Pond apartments for the schools were built for employee house, for teacher housing. And they built a bunch of 3-bedroom units for a bunch of single people. And then the teachers ended up mostly being single, didn't want roommates. They were too expensive. And so knowing what we're building, frankly, we know we need it all, from studios to 4- and 5-bedroom houses. at different price points, but where we prioritize, where's the need, and it's always a moving target, right? Because our population is changing. But right now, those waiting lists are really long and comprehensive, so that was a long answer.
Just to tack a tiny bit onto that. We, at this point, are so desperate to fill high-level positions such as DPW director and fire chief. Almost whatever comes along that seems somewhat reasonable, we're just trying to rent it and hold it and keep it.
So I think, this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg scenario, because I think to what Libby just said about, the hiring issues around the percentage of jobs that are unfilled, and also the recent sort of salary negotiations that have been happening. How will that sort of be rolled out so that people have more money to afford better housing? And how do we kind of measure that against any sort of criteria in the housing stock world? Because, how much money do you have to make on Nantucket to afford X house? And what percentage of town employees are making that money and can afford X house?
So what I will tell you is that we will never be able to afford to pay people to live in market rate housing on Nantucket. It's just not gonna happen. And if you do that, then you're just pushing prices up, right? So the answer is in an adequate supply of deed restricted housing at different area median income levels, so that there's housing available to town employees in an open market. I'm a huge non-advocate of employer-based housing. It's a response to a crisis. We need to do it. But in the long run, I have a friend who runs a restaurant, and I tell this story all the time. She said to me once, I have an underperforming employee that I can't let go because she's living in employer housing. And if I let her go, she'll be homeless. And that's what happens, right? You are making an employee and the employee's locked in. They can't go anywhere. They want a career move. They can't go anywhere. That is not, we don't want to be a company town. I don't want to be a company town.
So what's
But
the
we need to
rollout plan then for this deed restriction project? Like, how quickly will that be able to be implemented?
Well, we're going to form the deed restrictions, and hopefully they'll be ready by year end. And then we market it to the community and say, don't sell your house, sell it to, and the community land trust is going to come, and they're probably going to hold, it's public-private partnership, right? The different entities will hold different deed restrictions. So that all that planning is going to happen in the next few months. Similar to what we did with Neighborhood First, right? We got $20 million at town meeting in 2019. We didn't go spend it day one. Right. We sat down and we made a plan. And so having secure funding, as our finance director can tell you, allows you to do long-term planning. Because we can both use the dollars per dollar, right, of tax revenue, but we can also leverage it with borrowing. And so we're analyzing what we can bond for in terms of the projects we have planned and what has to be dollar for dollar tax spending. So for instance, we do closing cost assistance. We can't bond to fund that, but that's been a highly successful program. If we do down payment assistance, can we borrow for that? So we're getting advice from bond counsel about how the money can be used. So we're probably talking about between now and year end as being a planning phase. And then execution starting in January would be my general idea.
Just following up to try and understand some of the metrics.
Yeah.
As you develop this island within the island of deed protected housing stock, do you have a sense in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, what is that number going to be? And the amount of money you're getting from the town to purchase and then remove from the marketplace and then subsidize that. Do we have metrics on that?
Not yet. That's the data analytics project, but Matt will tell you in communities like ski town communities, they have upwards of 30 to 35% of their housing stock.
Yeah, 30 to 40%
Deed restricted.
is what they're shooting for, and to have people
Which
in their
is-
community, and they even have people living down valley. So the number isn't 10%. It's not 10% of our year round, it's 30 or 40% of everything is what they've shot. It is what they've found. Now, I don't know that we'll get there, and a lot of their housing is deed restricted, it has to be workforce, a local has to live in it. And those are on market. They're not restricted on price. They just have to, you have to be a doctor that works there. You have to be a, person that works in the town to do it. So there's different ways that people do it, but it's more substantial than 10% of our year round, that's for sure.
But that's a long runway.
It is a long way away.
In a real estate market that has very few houses for sale.
And that is true.
And
And
you
we've
have to
been-
do it
we've
with
been
more
tr-
than just money.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to do it other ways.
Yeah, can I just say something about this for a second? I don't know, we're sort of having this little round table, which is what I was hoping, was gonna happen, wasn't really sure if that was actually gonna happen. Brooke has said a lot of stuff today, okay? But I like to look back at how did we get here? It's not anyone's fault. We wanted this with the land use, the open space. 65% of Nantucket is untaxed. 32% has a house on it, and 3% doesn't. That's it. And what Brooke is talking about is 40 years of fixing in 10 minutes, and it's gonna. And so everyone, I think about the public. When we go to town meeting, we're lucky to get the 6.5. One person's foolish comment maybe helped that. It's going to be very difficult to convince the public of some of this stuff. Matt understands what I'm talking about. The locals don't want what we need in big numbers. Okay? Now, the buy down thing, I love that idea. I don't even really know who actually came up with that, but that is brilliant. But there's going to be different pieces. I understand that. And you and I have already talked about this 100 times. My concern is dirt. There's no dirt left. The seasonal resident pays 90%. We've been asking them for money for a long, long time, but now we're asking them for more, like big amounts to pay for some of this stuff. I think that we need to have a way to add to this discussion deep. When we have the build out analysis, which is coming out versus the open space plan, and that stuff is all part of this conversation. We're sewering, we're replacing the pressure main. Everybody sees what's going on with all that, but not everybody knows what's going on at Manny's and how we're swapping one pump station to the new one. There's gonna be more sewering, more things that need to happen to get, like your neighborhood, to get places that have a covenant house. If somebody came up to a local property owner that has no idea, has no thought of leaving, and you offer them a deed restriction payment to put their house in complete year-round ownership, they're gonna take it. Okay, the reason why is because we're 200 years ahead of inflation over here now. We're so far ahead of everywhere else in value. It's unthinkable to even discuss it. When I tell someone that doesn't know what's going on, that an acre of land at Tom Nevers in 1965 was $5,000, they look at me like, they think I need to be like taken off to the nut house. No, that's the truth. And in the last 30 years, the property values have gone up 1,500% as an average, 1,500%. So we're trying to fix something no one saw coming. Brooke, and I admire your efforts are beyond belief, how you've gotten involved in all this in a short period of time. But the convincing, the numbers with land, the areas, the Gray Avenue houses are selling for $4.5 to $5 million. If you said that to me 3 years ago, I would have thought you were great.
6.
Well, I think it didn't sell for 6, so did it?
It did.
It did it? Okay. Thought, see that? We're already another 1,000% higher. I didn't know that.
So now, one of the things that we can do is maximize the dirt, right?
Yeah.
If we buy a deed restriction on a property that has the ability for a covenant or even a subdivision or a tertiary or secondary dwelling, that what we're doing is we're taking underdeveloped year-round properties
Infill ones.
and filling in additional units, not in large-scale developments,
That's
but
what my next point, I don't have to say it now. That's where the build-out analysis is gonna help people, but it's gonna scare people.
Yeah.
So we have no land, but we have a lot of infill, so we have to like understand, and a lot of the new buildings, Matt, I know you like to talk about this stuff, but most of these new houses you're seeing are tear downs. They're not brand new, nothing was ever built. There's a lot of that. So we're just replacing a house with another house that might be better or bigger or whatever. So there's gonna be a lot of discussion about this. I think we're on the right track. There isn't really any other option about electric, other than what you're talking about.
And
So there's, and then you have the whole thing of people think there's too much of this and too much of that and too many of this. So it's gonna be very hard to talk about this publicly when we have to go to the voters to get what we're asking for.
so
That's it.
generally, as a policy, the Affordable Housing Trust develops within existing zoning. We're not asking for more than is permitted in existing zoning, right? And that's a strategy that we've used.
We've fixed a little bit.
And-
The double
and we've
covenant
worked-
and the Workforce housing bylaw has been adjusted.
Yeah, and
But other than that, you're right.
we need more work with planning to figure out small ways to tweak. We have some of the most permissive zoning in the Commonwealth in terms of
We do.
being able to get the job done for affordable housing. Most communities are fighting. They don't have ADUs, they don't have secondary dwellings.
Right.
They're really swimming upstream. We have the ability to do things. And so more collaboration between planning and the Affordable Housing Trust in terms of where we can tweak things around the edges, requiring affordable units in larger scale developments that require special permits, those kind of strategies that literally every possibility where we can get any new unit set aside for year-round housing, or as many as possible going forward is we're gonna need to do it. We need to attack this from every perspective. And now we have funding and we're continuing to pursue the housing bank for additional funding.
Matt mentioned the build out analysis, and that sounds like one very specific thing that is being done that really will inform and help, help folks understand what it's gonna look like. Are there any other kind of activities of these boards, of you all, that are in support of or will complement the town's work around housing?
The planning board, in the past few town meetings, has put forward a number of articles for attainable affordable housing. So we expanded the covenant program. We've created situations in some planning, some zoning districts to encourage more workforce style housing. So we're on the program and looking at options to help increase attainable affordable housing.
Others or anything that's intentional? Yeah.
Back in 2015, I was on the Affordable Housing Trust and it was a totally different board. I commend and compliment Brooke and the board presently for everything they've done. But back then, I think the shy list, the expectation was about 24 units per year to meet the shy list. Now I'm hearing it's 48 per year.
No, I had it backwards. It's 24, it's 48 for 49 for 2 years. So I
Okay.
just misspoke.
Thank you. Well, that helps. Okay, that kills my whole speech. It is frustrating, the bureaucracy and the red tape that you have to go through for the affordable housing to obtain land. The private industry right now is, the market is so great, as Nat always say, dirt, it's expensive. You cannot keep up. So when you look at the time frame it takes, and I believe back then, I don't know if the policy is still the same, if you identified property, you had to put a down payment as you normally would, but you had to go through a 30-day period with the select board because their meetings to obtain that, where anything above $100,000 had to be approved with the select board. So that pretty much killed that. The private developers and the owners aren't going to wait there. They're not when you have a lot of people looking at it, bidding above ask. So, the red tape is a big thing. And Matt mentioned something earlier that I noted also, policy is going to maybe be needed for this. So when you look at policy restrictions, years ago, we had a moratorium on building permits and it didn't fly very well. Because what happened was it had the adverse effect. People were rushing to the building department to put in permits. So even if they had no intention to build, they knew that it was going to be 6 months to a year out. So they threw in their permits and then they ended up building it. So we had to overbuild for the particular period of time. Now, I agree, there has to be some kind of policy implementation and cooperation with private industry. And the problem with that is we have 40Bs And we have a certain restriction of areas where people are allowed to build. We need town water, town sewer. So it's really restricted in a certain part of the island. And that's where the pushback from the public at all of our town meetings is happening. There's a lot of criticism because it's being overburdened on a particular area. We're not addressing, because of zoning, different areas to create affordable housing because it's the NIMBY effect. I don't want to have affordable housing next to my $18 million home. So that definitely poses a problem. But maybe there's some kind of policy, as I was going back to with Matt, where if we offered, a restriction, if we have a lot of big builders that will do, 10 houses a year. Maybe if similar to the 40B, where every 3 market rate, you build 1 affordable. Well, if you want to get 10 permits, you do 3 marketable permits at a certain minimal size, not a shed. Maybe a 3,000 square foot house, which is a decent size. And then you are forced to build 1 affordable house for the town or something like that. Because, by doing those, they might not do 10 houses a year. It might slow down the growth of building. I'm a builder. I'm also a realtor. And so I'm having, and I'm an advocate of affordable housing because we have to realize there's got to be a balance. If we don't support the people that are working here, living here, I don't know where we're going to be going. And we also looked at, for the town, we have town employees, hospital, police department, fire department. And I would venture to say, even with the rate that we have for salaries, 99% of those would qualify at some level of affordability. If we just build the housing for our town employees, we would hit the shy list. If we built 48 units per year, we would hit our town list just for the vital people that live here, work here every single day. Sorry about my rant, but that's.
Except
Frustration is what it is.
you can't allocate them to town employees and have them count on the subsidized housing. There's a limit to how many you
I
can
know, there's the red
give
tape,
to
right?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a need, there's a solution, but we're held by the standards of the state.
But in a town where 30%, we have a 30% rate of being unable to fill positions, right? That's gonna become a crisis in the short term that is worse than what we're talking about in the long term. Because in the next 5 years, if we can't attract the people that the town needs to work for it, we're not gonna be able to solve the bigger problems. So if we have all of this incredible collective talent in this room, it seems that we should maybe have a conversation about what do we do in the short term to get the town at least more employees and provide for housing for them, because if we don't have the staff, we're not gonna be able to do the work. That's where we are.
Clarify, Libby, it's not 30% of town positions are unfilled. It's 30% have turned over, but that includes positions that are filled, is that?
I would have to find out from HR where we currently.
Rick is.
Oh, Rick, do you know?
Last year.
11% vacancy, 30% turnover.
So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And now, we finally have a financial commitment from the taxpayers to
I have a
get the job done.
quick clarification. When you said you aren't in favor of employer housing, does that also extend to the town? Do you not-
Just in principle, I don't think having your housing tied to your employment is a great strategy for people in the long run.
It's an excellent strategy for all the businesses.
It is.
She and I argue about it all the time.
But let me put it this way, it has some significant downsides, potential downsides. Not the least of which is the town in the business of owning and managing housing? Should we be in the business of owning and managing housing? And the answer to that to me is in the short run, absolutely. But as a long-term strategy, maybe not. My goal is an adequate supply of housing that's available in the marketplace so that people can, it's an aspirational goal, right? I mean, we have to do things that we wouldn't necessarily want to do. We've done apartment complexes that nobody wanted. We've done, because the traditional single family home with a backyard is not going to solve our problem. We've adapted over time. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing overall, but if that's our only answer, it's not necessarily great either, because as long as there's still a shortage of housing, it creates a weird relationship between employer and employee. that may not be good for people in the long run. And I just know some personal situations where it's been really bad for people to have their housing.
so
They've
Brooke-
been mistreated by their
So-
employers.
Yeah, so you had your hand up, Chris.
I just want to ask Brooke, I mean, you guys differentiate, I mean, there's two groups that need housing. There's ones that if they got it, they can't afford it. And if there's ones that get it, they can afford it. So how do you weigh in housing needs when you have someone that can't afford it anyway? And maybe I'm referring to home ownership.
Yep.
But also the effort of, you know, increasing rentals as well, you know.
Well, as I said, throw a dart at the wall, we need all of it, right? And the federal standard is 30% of gross income spent on mortgage or rent and basic utilities. Every bank here is approving people up to 40% of their income to be able to acquire homes, if not even slightly higher. We know there's a difference here in terms of affordability. It's supply that's the biggest problem. I know people who can afford to pay unlimited, you know, they have resources and they can't find a place to live. So what was it Brian Sullivan said at the state the other day? There are 2 houses on the market currently in Nantucket for under $2 million, and one of them is at $1.6 million. It's a 1950s 1-bedroom, 1-bath that hasn't been renovated since it was built in the 50s.
And has lots of ground cover available.
Right,
That's
so
right, too.
infill, I think, is gonna be a really,
Yeah.
once we capture deed restrictions, then. And then you make it affordable because the land cost is already there, and then it's just construction cost. And we can help people. 240% of area median income could support. I think the number was, we looked at like a $7,500 a month mortgage. So this is, and people can't afford it, right? That buys you a house under $2 million. They don't exist in the marketplace. So that's the conundrum we have. But to me, capturing units that are being divested from year-rounders is going to be our next big step, along with continuing to create rentals, because that's our path to subsidized housing inventory. So we need these parallel paths.
One
So
thing,
housing, I think is a policy.
Sucks the air out of the
It's
room.
something, well, yeah, that's what happened. And I think it's something that, you know, everyone has feelings about and knowledge about. And the interplay between what the activities of the various boards are and the priority of the town is kind of how I think it would be most important to focus the conversation, just in terms of, are there things you're doing maybe that are in conflict with now or in tension with the goal? We've heard some things that I think are very clearly supportive of, but is there anything that's happening that's really in tension with? Yes.
What I'm hearing from what I've heard from you before, some of the conflict is the rentals. You were a little pressured for rentals, right, because of shy. But I hear you talking about wanting to, you know, give people long-term homes, and so it's like 2 tracks for you, right? And I think that's kind of
100%.
that's some of the problem. I was gonna ask, did the state, are they okay with us changing the AMI, or does it still have to stay at their level?
Well, so Jill, changing so the Affordable Housing Trust guidelines for enabling legislation didn't really have a definition of what affordable housing was. And so we codified that by defining affordable up to 80% area median income and attainable from there to 240% area median income, to give us runway to use the funding at multiple AMI levels. The state is not going to change the AMI level for what they consider shy listed housing. That is a non-starter. I can't get a housing bank bill passed at the State House. There's
So we
no
always
way.
have to have the 80% within a rental.
And we need it.
The 240% that you're talking about. That's like the Nantucket, I look at it as a Nantucket track and the state track.
And we look at people who've gotten habitat homes, right? 2 of them spoke up at town meeting, whose lives and their ability to stay here and grow in their careers and contribute to the community depended on them getting a very low income home ownership opportunity. So while, I mean, we need all of it, right? We need all of it. And so I think some data analytics is going to be critical in setting policy priorities.
and-
Let me try to wind this down and move on to transportation, which nobody has opinions about.
but here, but the where the conflict I think is gonna be is, you know, Rick Atherton is always talking about the town should be taking care of its own housing first. And so I think, and he's right, in some respects, because you can't run, if you don't have the staff, you can't run a town and you can't support everybody else anyway. So, there's a lot of truth to that. And then that's going to become a priority issue. Now that there's money identified and available, the issue is going to be, how does the town get enough of its own heads in beds versus what other things that want to get done. And so, it's great, we want everything, but at some point, we're gonna have to prioritize what goes first. And I think that's gonna be, that is not gonna be an easy conversation. And, and I think the rental part is really important, because the rentals, if we could solve that first in a lot of ways, I agree with taking houses off the market, they're gonna be changed. But I think the rental part, that's where that's where you should get your employees started, you get them, working for the town, working other places, and then they work their way through and up into covenant homes and maybe eventually non-covenant homes, or islander homes. But I think, so that's gonna be the tension is gonna be like the town and the other, and it's gonna be rental versus, subsidy and, ownership.
Barry, Rector would like to speak on this topic too, and then I do want to move us to transportation.
Yep. So thank you. I'm going to try to be brief at this point. That's right. Essentially, we are competing against ourselves in different arenas here that really do conflict against each other. As Nat said, it's all about land use, land mass, and what's available for us to build on. So there's this intertension that we've built between trying to restrict the use of land for conservation resources, yet in the meantime have land available at a reasonable cost where we can do building. So, what are some of the solutions we need to look at? I think we need to set our priorities, and where we look at it, take a hard look at where we are competing against ourselves in different arenas. I mean, I think through zoning, one thing that we've certainly tried to do is make better use of the land mass that's available out there. But there has to be maybe some other solutions we need to look at. Certainly one thing that I hope the town has an appetite for is with the new transfer fees that have come out that the state made available. I think that's something we need to capitalize on. If memory serves me correct, I thought the state was looking at transfer fees available for affordable housing.
We've been fighting for it for 10 years unsuccessfully. We'll see.
Okay, no, I am sorry. Then I maybe, but well, we still need to compete into that arena, though. That is a must, because it's not only just a matter of land mass; it's also economic tools to make it happen. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to look at a different way of dealing things, like first rights of refusals that would go through the town. Again, thinking way outside the box of things. Another thing that we maybe need to embrace a little bit further as well is the concept of telecommuting. I know with our transportation planner right now, that seems to work incredibly well. Not every job requires us to have to be on site 40 hours a week. So and again, when they are over here, we offer them the availability of having some type of affordable housing or housing for them for that short period while they're there. Though there's a number of different tools that I think we need to do, but some of them are going to be a function of where do we have the appetite for making changes that maybe we haven't even thought of, or again, setting priorities about what directions do we really want to head in. Thank you.
Okay, so transportation. Again, the question is what are some things that are activities of the various boards or committees that are supportive of what the town has shared in terms of their goals around transportation? And is there anything that's happening that's in conflict or in tension with the direction that the select board is saying we're going to go in this area? Yes, Andy.
I mean, the NPDC, Mike Burns could add to it, but he's busy preparing a long-range transportation plan. That's a requirement. It's required to receive our federal funding. it's a requirement in every region, and I think everything we're doing is totally consistent with what the board, at least in the street. I think it comes a lot more. It's more than just one connection between Midnight and downtown. It's probably 5 or 6 bike paths on various states. Right. So anyway, we have I think we're in complete
Alignment.
sync.
It's good in sync. Okay. Others.
Can I just say something real quick before we get into this? This is a very complicated conversation about just transportation. What does that mean? Like if you were in Boston, you'd be talking about the subway, you'd be talking about the big dig 20 years ago, you know, that kind of thing. Nantucket is a slow hourglass of progress, very slow. Wasn't long ago, we had 2 bike paths. Okay, Nantucket was the last one we were gonna build, right? Okay, so it wasn't long ago, you didn't have fast ferries. So when we look at things from a perspective of now versus just in breaking it down from the near past to recent past to now, you have to have that understanding. So I'm going to give an example of some of the things that this is how I sort of look at this. The BPAC group was one of the smartest things we ever did, because they look at things that we were not focusing on as planning commission directly. Like they're looking at sidewalk, pedestrian, bike stuff in it, and that's what they're looking at. And with this e-bike thing that just popped up in 5 minutes, and everybody's got one. This is a good, if that group wasn't looking at this with the efforts that they've already made, it would be way worse of a problem for the town to deal with, because they wouldn't really have any experience dealing with that. So to just close out my little point, and other people will have plenty to say, I'm sure, is I like to separate the small, easy fixes that make a big difference here. For example, Francis Street turn. We've been waiting 80 years, 70 years, 50 years to fix that. Now we don't even remember fixing it. It was 13 months ago. Okay? Look how nice that works. Did we ruin the island? Did we destroy Nantucket by fixing it? No. We fixed a major problem without thinking. It just happened, but it took like 2 generations of 3 to fix it. We fixed the other 2 turns before that. Okay, now a truck can leave town without blocking everybody safely. People can cross, you can see who's there. It's really pretty easy. I'm a believer in simple solutions to Nantucket, because the big stuff like paid parking, Matt and I kind of have a little, back and forth with this stuff. Nantucket is better served with small, noticeable, but improvements that don't change the character. That's where we get into trouble, when we start trying to make things too much like somewhere else. But the bike thing, this new electric bike thing, is going to be the big change, game-changing thing that happens that forces us to do some of the things that we've already been working on. But now we really have to do something, because you're not going to ban something that's electric. I can tell you that. That ain't gonna happen. So that's one more thing. I won't bring up steamship stuff directly, but next summer, the food trucks that deliver in town are gonna get here at 7:30. Every one of them. I want everyone to know that. Thank you.
I remember the old days, they used to do that.
We need to help them deliver in town, because they're all gonna get here at 7:30 instead of 8:30. Thank you to these new voters that we get. If everything goes right, something doesn't go wrong, that's going to happen. Which has been a struggle for a long time to get that to happen.
Okay, anybody else on transportation? Yes, Brooke.
I stepped out for a minute. To me, beefing up NERDA, the NERDA Advisory Board, and more collaboration with NERDA in terms of public transportation to help reduce traffic. I think that is, the cars are here. We're not sending them away. Everybody wants everybody else to give up their cars. How do we
Mhm.
make the carrots that get people to ride? Make the riding of public transportation a positive experience so that it's actually easier than getting in your car is what we need to do.
Yeah.
Especially for commuters.
Other boards or? Yes.
Just sort of transportation, a lot has been discussed at the NPDC. We looked at a lot of things from the past 30 years from the bike paths, how have they gone from 0 to 2 to 5 or 6. We looked at the steamships, and the High Line were adding fast boats, which was big. Some suggestions were maybe get a shuttle from the High Line, have them practically sponsor it to go out to our newly formed parking in the last few years out at our plus building. So that's helped alleviate downtown parking, commercial vehicles, things like that. Rotary, we've been talking about updating that. Which brings about 2 roundabouts that we were looking at, one at the Newbury Farm Road and one at Fairgrounds. And I bring up those 2 in particular because years ago we had a mock roundabout made up on the South Shore, Old South Road and Fairgrounds. And I thought it worked very, very well, but it did have a couple of faults because it was undersized as a model. It wasn't proportionally built to the standards that we were proposing. So something that worked was not voted on at the town meeting. We had certain grants and positions and ready to go, but things that we've, the frustration part, worked on for a year or 2, only to be shot down. And now we look at it, fast forward a few years, the backups that we have on 2 particular areas, like Fairgrounds and Old South, with the opening up and the development of Richmond Group, has had traffic from our main rotary here backed up all the way to the Richmond Group. So that roundabout should be something of discussion that we bring up again, because it actually worked. And instead of waiting and causing accidents, because a lot of people, if you look at the rules and regulations of the road, you shouldn't stop in the middle of the road to let somebody go. You should really continually to go. And what happens is if you're not paying attention, people are texting, they slam behind and have accidents. The roundabout actually is almost like a zipper. You go, I go, you go, but it's on a natural flow. So it would alleviate, I think, a lot of traffic. But as Matt had said, and I remember this, you can only get so many people downtown. You can't fit a quarter in a dime slot. So wherever the traffic is, if there's no place to put the people where their destination is downtown, it doesn't matter what you do. But that would, I think, alleviate a lot going out to Sconset and things like that. The Nobody Farm Road has a lot of other implications as far as putting the roundabout, because not only have we seen in the last few years just a little back up to the Delta, the Delta fields, now it's continuing all the way down the road past the new school. And if that was a roundabout, not a major rotary like Hyannis, but if that was a roundabout, it would do a couple of things: slow down the people that are approaching from Milestone Road, so they drop down to that 20 miles an hour. And then all the people that are backed up on the Nobledere Farm Road would be able to ease their way into it, just like a zipper. Now you would have 3 forms of, coming down from Sconset, going out from the Nobledere, and coming from the rotary. So those are things, just from the transportation to help. Obviously, the NERDA, the Nantucket Regional Transportation Authority, has drastically changed the landscape of Nantucket as far as public transportation. That's helped facilitate a lot of things. We incorporated a couple of years ago a year-round service in the most highly used route, which was the Fairgrounds Road. I think that generated 50%, if I'm not mistaken, of all the revenue generated from the NRTA. So that was important that we include that in a year-round service. Yes, is there a need now potentially to maybe expand more year-round services? Definitely. But we have Mike Burns back, which I love because he was very educated in the grants from the state, and that is something that we lost out for the last few years. I think I've stated numerous times, penny wise, dollar foolish. We didn't have anybody in that position to do the grant writing, and I think we lost about $500,000 a year, over 3 years of Mike being gone, that's $1.5 million. That if we paid somebody, that's a lot of money that we lost. I'm happy that we're back on the right track with those. So that fills a necessity there. But I guess overall, the frustrating part is when you have a plan, you're working with a board and you work on it with multiple public hearings for over a year, only to have a small group of voters shoot it down at town meeting or at the poll, which that is the right. I understand the process and I'm 100% agreeing with the process as stated previously and other boards. But it is frustrating when you have a plan that looks like it works and then at the last 24th hour, it got shut down. And that kind of changes the whole, outcome of that. Sorry again, I'm actually a very positive person.
Sounds like me.
It's coming out today.
Just coffee is what I want to know. So we've got a couple of people that Seth wants to speak and Barry wants to speak. we haven't heard from Seth, so we bring him in and then Barry will come to you and then Matt.
Thank you. I just want to circle back on the e-bikes and have another conversation about that. I know a lot of people have heard me talk about this before, but e-bikes, scooters, all types of micromobility devices, I think is a huge, easy win for the town. And it's not just for transportation. Besides for efficient town operations, it has to deal with all of these things: environmental leadership, transportation, housing, and quality of life. And I'm going to say why. But the thing about these micromobility devices or motorized passenger devices is that most people in the town don't actually know this, but by code of the town of Nantucket, they are not permitted. People are buying them, they're bringing them here, they're ordering off Amazon, who knows what. And I don't think the police are ticketing on people, but they certainly could be. We need to really look back at how we can, and I understand there's safety and permitting and, regulations that need to be put into place. But we really need to very quickly find out a way that we can change that part of the bylaw to permit them rather than prohibit them, because they impact all these things. They make they help move transportation to other modes other than cars. They help with decreasing carbon emissions, which is obviously important for environmental leadership and in quality of life. I don't know if anyone's ever used one of these things before, but they're genuinely fun to ride. Being on the bike path, going slower, seeing the wetlands that you pass by, enjoying Nantucket. Maybe it takes you a little bit longer to get to work or get to town, but it's an enjoyable activity in and of itself. I drive my car every day. I hate it. I think I'm gonna die every single time I get on the roads on Nantucket because the drivers here really have a lot of problems. But
Got orders,
but-
Chris, and then I'll come to you.
But
after.
really, and then with housing, and this has been something that at this town meeting we helped out with. But with housing, you also need to provide parking. And I know we changed some of the requirements so that you can provide less parking spaces for affordable housing units now. I think that's great. But people, if they live somewhere, they need to also get other places. Unless they're working at home. I mean, some people maybe work from home, but a lot of people have to get to work, have to get to the grocery store, have to get to town, have to enjoy their life and recreate. You need to provide a suitable opportunity for them to do that. And I think the bus, I think Narita is great. And I think we need to also look at micromobility as that big second tool in our toolbox to allow for people who maybe can't even afford vehicles here to have a suitable transportation system on island.
Barry.
You can let other people go. I can wait a few moments, please.
All right, Matt, and then Chris.
Yeah, just a couple things John said. We know where we're having the backups now was predicted 20 years ago. That that was in there. The same consultants said, we asked them, would they predict? And they didn't want to, but they said, well, if it continues at this pace, what will end up happening is you'll have backups. You'll have to close, one road will have to be just for cars, just for taxis and trucks. And that will make the other roads busier. You'll have to close the street downtown. Then eventually you close 2 streets and 3 streets So the option, where we'll end up if we continue on this path isn't particularly great. So I think the things John's talking about, sort of, simple solutions, the roundabouts and, one that I want to bring up that's, is connecting streets. We would have less problem on Old South Road if the neighborhoods would let the streets be connected and make more of a grid pattern there. We have a downtown that carries a lot of vehicles because there's a lot of ways in and out, and we have subdivisions that don't. And so, I know that that's not popular, but that is something that has to happen. And I think how we get there is we have to have public meetings, but we have to have public meetings that people don't want, they're mad about things. We have to build the consensus underneath, and it takes a lot of work. And I think that's sometimes, I feel like we fall down as a town in that regard, that we, and it's 1 or 2 meetings where everyone's up in arms and then we don't get anywhere. And the things where we actually have gotten somewhere, we've had it longer, we've had the meetings longer, we've had the issue out, and we really have focused on it. And I think that's an important improvement that still needs to be made. And we're trying to do that on the town side, on the stuff that is contentious, is having more, face-to-face, now that we're out of COVID, more of that interaction to build that consensus. So.
I was just gonna piggyback on Seth's point, as you approve and approach, accepting e-transport, e-bikes and scooters, you also need to regulate and enforce, because some of them are extremely fast and people have gotten killed. So if you have people walking on a bike path and you have a student cruising by going about 28 miles an hour, and that person walking decides to shift their position for a bit, it will hurt them very bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying like just
Yeah, I know.
allow
I'm
everything
just-
today, but let's
yeah,
do it right and let's do it quickly if we can.
Barry, back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Just a few things I want to mention. One of the main missions that's always been drilled into my head about the planning board is that we are about the interconnectedness of roadway systems. Sometimes it doesn't make sense in a subdivision, though, to put over, to make a lot of different connections, because really it's a smaller, minor roadway system you're dealing with. Where we seem to have most of our problems with is, and I think Mike Burns would echo this, is with our major collector systems. And now I'm going to go back to what John Trudell said earlier. I think as being on the NP and EDC and through the planning board, we've tried to advance a lot of these initiatives about doing more roundabouts, making traffic flow at a much more normal pace. And a lot of times we keep getting shut down on this when it either goes to town meeting or at the polls. I think we need to re-engage on a lot of those projects. One thing that I've noticed with behavior of drivers is that all of a sudden they're not using the major roadways anymore. They're trying to use the less known paths to get there. But what comes inherent with that is that I also watch people speed up as well too, when either A, they clear through the major traffic jam, or number two, they're having to take an alternate route to get somewhere, but it's taking them longer to get there. So I don't know how you would ever correct that outside of trying to make it easier with the main grid patterns that we have. Certainly, I think we need to go back and look again at parking in the downtown district. That has to happen. We've been saying this for years and years and years. It's time to start making that happen, both in terms of maybe metered or time parking with things, as well as having to introduce a garage system down in the downtown core district to free up more additional parking spaces. It may also mean too, maybe having to think serious about the High Line, where it's at, and maybe instead of doing infrastructure improvements there, maybe it's time to think about moving the High Line and creating a system that works a lot better in terms of traffic flow and traffic management. One thing is for certain, where it is right now, it's not working. I would challenge that in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think people realized 20 years ago, we're all used to flying in and out of here. Nowadays, it's the fast ferries that are moving the bulk of individuals around. And I'd probably say the High Line does an incredibly good job of doing that, especially during the winter and stuff, but it comes at a price in terms of traffic congestion. The last thing I think we need to look at is the NRTA. One thing I've brought up, and I'll still continue to bring up, is that we need to look at doing reverse routes on the NRTA as well too. One problem I do note is that on the NRTA, if you want to try to go somewhere, your only option a lot of times is to have to go downtown, wait for the bus time to turn, and then have to go back around again. Maybe using reverse routes may make that a lot more user-friendly system. So anyways, just a few thoughts on that issue. Thank you.
So Andrew has his hand up, and then I think we'll try to move from transportation to environmental leadership.
I just want to point out one thing about transportation and interconnecting roads is that the county commissioners are the key to making that happen. And what we hear quite frequently is, and this needs to be resolved, is the more public roads you have, the more maintenance and other things you're going to have with it. So we can't be hearing we need public roads expanded and connected, and then to hear, well, there's no money for maintenance and other things. So I think that's probably an internal conflict that's got to get worked out at the select board county level. The planning board, I can tell you, we've lined up roads across this island that have not moved forward because it's never stated as a priority. And there are several instances connecting roads into Richmond, connecting roads in the Mid-Island area that are there, but not moving forward because it's never a real priority. It has to come from the county.
Thank you. Well, one more thing.
Just a
one-
teensy little bit. This is way more important of a conversation probably than other than housing. This is like number 2, I would say. I want to say a couple things, Matt, is to add to a couple things. We never ever thought about on-street parking and subdivisions in the 80s. If you look at all the roads that were done back in the day, you know, the 3M stuff, that wasn't the type of neighborhood for that, but I'm talking about Appleton, all those roads were all, where there's all these parking problems, Pine Tree, Marianne, maybe. There is not one on-street space at all. Not one. Now, Amelia Drive, 87, 88. Am I right? Like 87, right? 23 feet wide. If it was 5 more feet wide, we would never have had an argument about on-street parking on one side. Just that 5 feet, but no one thought about it. So one of the things, Julia, that you have to understand, we love to blame people on Nantucket. We find people to blame for things 100 years ago. It's unbelievable. But it really isn't anyone's fault. It was, at the time, it wasn't thought of as something to look at. Now, as I said earlier, this is like the Manhattan Project now here. Like, we're just trying to fix everything that was done because we just didn't really think of it. And now we're trying to fix it all now. And, you know, the airport's on straight walk. I said that at town meeting, it's a fact. No one knew that was coming. No one saw it coming. No one thought about it. But the airport is the AMP parking lot. It is. I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say something like that, but that is a fact. The airport parking lot's got plenty of room. There you go. Thank you.
Shall we move to environmental leadership? So what are some things that you all are doing on your boards and committees that are supportive of the select board's priorities? And is there anything that's, you know, kind of a point of tension?
Yeah, I think with the Concom, I think the aspirational statement for environmental leadership reads really well. And I think both the goals are good, but they really more focus on town staff and town departments rather than us at a regulatory body level. I do, maybe not from the Concom, but as a individual citizen, do you see the goals as maybe not being robust enough? Because there's some things I think are missing. There's stuff in the aspirational statement, resiliency is called out, but in the goals, there's nothing about climate change or coastal resiliency. And I know the select board created CRAC, which I think is a hugely important decision, but the select board also needs to take ownership of that as well, because if you think about housing or transportation or quality of life. Those things are all great in theory, but you need critical infrastructure to be protected on Nantucket. We don't do anything about climate change and sea level rise. You know, there's no steamship, there's no Highland, there's no C Street pump station. So I think that when this update happens, those aspects of climate change and coastal resiliency need to be put back in as a specific goal.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with Seth that those top level is great, but it really does need a lot more specifics. One thing that's coming to mind is for the Retailers Association, they just had a presentation from National Grid at our annual meeting about like being carbon, neutral or whatever by 2050. And the infrastructure that's required to make that happen with cars and everything, like electric, that alone, like electric car charging stations, that one. Any one of these things is huge, like that goal is just crazy to me, but it's what we need to do. So I think we need to be talking about accelerating a lot of, electric stuff. I think when I got solar on my house, working with the HTC was very difficult. That's 6 years ago now, I think, so maybe it's gotten better, but, there's some things that we really need to be able to accelerate, and the bureaucracy and going to need so many meetings about it just to be something that's the right thing to do. I think we can do better. So.
I'm sorry, Linda Williams. Thank you.
Are you ready for me?
We are, I hope.
We, since we're in the environmental stuff, we're doing the harbor plan and Mattocket update, which Seth didn't mention in his comments just a few minutes ago. And we had over 130 people at the first public meeting for the redo of the plan, the review of the plan. And that ties in with all the environmental issues because of sea level rise, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So it's probably a 2-year process to update the 2009 plan, which updated the 1993 plan. So there is a whole component here of harbor access, Chapter 91, sea level rise, lack of ability to get boats out of the water. People who do have Chapter 91, especially through the planning board, not adhering to their special permits in the Chapter 91 from the state. How do we enforce Chapter 91? There is an awful lot of crossover with this harbor plan. Shellfish, working waterfronts, water dependent uses. And we've expanded the jurisdiction of the plan, and it's been sent up to the state to bless it so we can keep moving forward. Around the Mattocket Harbor, the ditch in Mattocket, we've included that. And around the harbor itself, because of the flooding has expanded beyond what it used to be. The 100-year storm is happening every year. So there's a whole nother component to this that we are working on, but it's a long process. Just wanted to put that on the table.
Thank you. That's helpful. Anything else? Yes.
I think that there's a few things. There's many citizen warrant articles that have come before the finance committee about various environmental issues. And one of the constant debates that we have is whether it's an aspirational goal and we support it. It supports behavior change. And then on the flip side of it, enforcement issues, right? So we have not really been able to come to some sort of consensus. And I mean, there's this plastics ban, there's the NIPS ban, there's a bunch of issues that we have. This year it was the lighting issue, where we really, there's a desire, I think, from the boards and from the community to put forth environmental stuff, but we don't have any teeth on the back end of some of this thing. There was a large debate about fertilizer, so there's been many issues where we have, as a community, supported making steps in the right direction, but as a town, haven't really been able to figure out how we pay for enforcement. I think that's number one. The second thing is that since I'm on the coastal resilience committee, I will advocate that I'm concerned that we're only saving $1 million a year, right, for a plan that's going to cost more than $350 million. And we haven't figured out a map to get to the financial commitment that we need to in order to dig into paying for that plan. And I think the last thing, which many people here have heard me say, we desperately need a grant writer. There is money on the table from the state and the federal government that can help us with especially some of the environmental leadership things and also the coastal resilience. Thank you.
I will just say the fact that Nantucket is an island, especially for environmental leadership, it can be beneficial, you know, like for housing, I think that's a detriment. In other communities, people will just move out elsewhere and commute. But for environmental leadership, things like our water quality management plan, you know, all of the impacts that we're having, that we're trying to mitigate and protect against, they're happening here. We don't have to, we're not the city of Boston worrying about what's happening north, south, west of us. Everything that we are impacting is being done on this island. So, I mean, I guess there's global pollution, non-point source pollution events, but we have the ability in this closed loop system to make reliable, long-lasting change. We might have limited financial and logistic resources to do that, but it's great to have a community where you don't have to worry about what's happening elsewhere. We're able to really just own our own problems, and if people want to look to us as an example of leadership, you know, I would say that's great, but it's a little bit subjective because other communities can do awesome things and still be impacted by their neighbors. We're just kind of impacted only by ourselves here.
Yeah, Malcolm.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of it's been enforcement, and we all mean well. What we're missing, I think, is adequate education. You may say that's unusual because everybody knows the environment is important. But, you know, you walked down the harbor the other day, and there was a lawn that was so green, like, 20 feet from the harbor. And I'm saying, those people need to understand what our regulations are and what's good for the island. So I think we need to enforcement, yes, but we also need a little better education. Particularly for some of our off-island visitors don't quite get it.
Mary?
I think we need to think more clearly about not generating as much damage. So we talk a lot about how we're going to manage it, and how we're going to regulate it. What if we just stop creating harm in the first place? And, we need to, I'm glad that we have a solid waste coordinator. This is an area that's definitely suffered from the lack of staff. We need to do better about not generating as much waste so we don't have to pay to ship it off. We need to educate people about not doing so many things to the island that they then throw away. We need to do a better job of not relying on citizens to bring waste reduction articles to town meetings, but thinking about that from a wider perspective. I think we need to do a lot more to not cause the problems.
Yeah, and I'll say that some of those waste reduction articles actually created other problems, like PFAS in compostable containers that, when we replaced recyclable plastics with compostable, we got a whole new PFAS problem in the waste stream. So and obviously you don't know what you don't know at the time you propose it, right? So a lot of that conversation around solid waste planning is waste streams, cost, new technologies, and that's going to be a really important piece. But Mary, you're right. If we just, I don't know, bring less of it where we can, or educate people not to.
Should we push on to efficient town operations? Any of the committees want to make comments about activities that are supportive of this or something like this? Yeah, we'll start with you and then I'll come to you.
I've got a quick little joke. More joint meetings. This is great.
Yeah.
Good.
I just want to say something really positive about this topic, and I don't even know what Libby has prepared or Dawn or anything. But I can tell you, in the last few years, I don't know exactly what year it started, because whenever we dug up Prospect Street, after that, we fixed a lot of that. This water and sewer are like one business now, one entity or one, whatever you wanna say. This island, again, is at another life. At another time, we had things that no one knows about, just go down to the Getty's parking lot and see all the town gas pipes that are piled up down there on Lily Street. It's a modern marvel of the era sitting there. Amazing. And everything that was done so far since then has been a coordinated effort between those two entities and probably others that I'm not aware of, but I just know what's going on with them because I talk to them all the time. They know what's under the street and what needs to get fixed. If somebody's opening up the street or whatever that is, other things are getting fixed at the same time. That is stuff that needs to be commended, needs to be built from, and it needs to be told to the public. So I don't know how that happens, but the public needs good news on the bucket. They need to know what's coming off the books. They need to know things that make them feel like somebody knows what they're doing. Because it's really a hard, this is a very difficult place to go to the Stop and Shop. Okay, I get accosted with Stop and Shop. I get called with questions that I don't even have the answers to. I have to ask somebody else and get back to the person asking. It's just how it is here. But there are good things happening here. You just can't see them physically, see what's going on. But there's a lot of good stuff happening between the town departments.
Great example, very.
I want to build on what Matt said. There are a number of areas where we are so far ahead of everybody else. As Brooke said, we have the most access to affordable housing creation. We have a culture of intent that other communities are looking at and saying, we want to do what you already did. We have sewering. A lot of communities either still have combined storm and sanitary flows. We don't, we split them apart decades ago. A lot of communities don't even have sewer. They have septic systems like on the Cape. We've been sewering for years. But we have done a lot of things right and early. And I think that's right. We need to just remind ourselves of that sometimes, even though it's not enough.
Yeah, no, that's certainly, you can ask for nicer comments than that. Tom?
Yeah, just quickly, I want to piggyback on that and Mary's comments. Went on Friday to a Mass Municipal Association training for newly elected select board members from all over the Commonwealth. And speaking with the other colleagues from other cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth, we are very far ahead of the game with the challenges they face on housing. They're dealing with 40Bs and short-term rentals and like, oh, what do you guys are so far ahead of the game. And you know, some of that in that specific issue, we're kind of just getting to hopefully some sort of resolution, but just hearing about their challenges and their staffing issues and the housing prices are going up. We are so far on the end of the scale on housing prices. So we're so far an outlier, but they have it, all these towns have exactly the same challenges we are. And I was very proud of the town and everybody who's a volunteer on all these boards who put in all the work to try and solve these problems.
Yes.
So PFAS, we had a summit where all the departments came together. This kind of collaborative dialogue, cross department, cross board dialogue is really critical. And I think that since town meeting, the thing that I'm hearing the most is people don't know what's going on. And I'm gonna throw out a dilemma. I don't know how to solve it. I've spent a lot of time talking about it in the last few weeks. Civic engagement, I think in some ways is at an all-time low in terms of while our transparency and the information available to our community, in my mind, is at an all-time high. And how to communicate and engage the voters is going to be a challenge we have. And it speaks to some of these things that don't pass at town meeting because people say they don't understand and they don't know where the information, but I know people are running around. We've been doing it in housing for years, trying to communicate. So I just throw it out. Thank goodness for the expanded communications department, opportunities for more good news. And to Matt's point, collaborative decision-making and community engagement on big projects in advance of when they come out. So you don't get a squeaky number of opponents capturing the air and stymieing something that's been worked on for years. Which has happened, I mean, countless times. I've been here 10 years and I can.
Brooke, maybe this is a question for Libby, but what is the town's communication strategy to possibly communicate, have the paper write up these articles? Because like you, oftentimes people come back to the island, the first thing they ask is, what's the big conflict? And maybe there isn't one. And there's a ton of good stuff that goes on, but what do we have in a communication strategy to maybe put that forward more?
Well, we have a communication strategic plan, which was reviewed with the board in December, I think. And a new-ish communications division within town administration. It has a communications manager and a public outreach coordinator. We perhaps need some additional staff. We've contracted with communications vendors to help do outreach and also analyze the outreach that we're doing. I think when people say, what's the conflict? Someone's gonna give you one. And it might not be a real one. But I also just want to note that we've had communications or discussions with a lot of our counterparts in other towns, and everybody agrees that towns are struggling right now with public outreach and getting their communities to know what is going on, just what we've all said here. Everybody in this room probably, for the most part, knows a lot of what is going on. But it's hard to get the public's attention, and it has to be very specific. Florencia could speak to this if we needed her to, but things have to be in bite-sized pieces. You have to give it to people in a manner that will, in this day and age, make them pay attention. It can't be a newspaper anymore. I'm sorry, newspaper people, but people are not reading newspaper stories the way they used to. And towns cannot rely on newspapers to get their information out for them. That is a common theme with municipalities. So we have a strategy. We need to, we're constantly working to improve it. And, you know, any ideas people want to give us later?
I'm
Happy to
gonna
hear.
call on Mike Burns, who's gonna just mention some of the work they're doing on public participation specifically, since that was a question that came up, and then I'll come back to the room. Mike.
Yeah, I'll just note that I appreciate the concern, and we are, it was mentioned earlier, we're going through the process of updating our long-range transportation plan now. The communication staff has been extremely helpful with that. I can say that from our outreach that we've done for the updating, at least the survey, like the responses that we are getting are heavily skewed towards very wealthy, older, white homeowners. Those are the responses we're getting from, and it's not very representative of the community. So that's just something to get better at. I think we all appreciate the need to reach out to the community and have a very dynamic public participation process. I've tried to get better with that over time and the techniques that we use. You can't make people take these surveys and participate, but just I would just note that that's something that we need to get better at, because it was just not very good, the hearing input from lower income portions of the population, the renter population, and all the rest of them that were just, we didn't do a very good job at getting responses from a representative cross-section of the community. So
Okay,
thanks.
back and forth, I got Mary, and then Brooke, and then Matt, and then I think John. Boom, 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 boom.
So I want to reiterate, one of the things that we do very well is our communication strategy. When you compare us to other towns,
Yeah.
it isn't enough, but it isn't efficient. You know, we have videos online. The towns don't even have videos online. They don't have TV access. They don't have a lot of the things that we are doing. So I want to not at all point any fingers at who's trying to do the work. But what we have to measure is results in that effort. We have to say, as Mike said, who's taking our surveys, and if we're not reaching the representative part of the community, how do we reach them? And we need to keep trying different things. And it's not easy, because some of them are not interested in being reached. Some of them don't believe that their words matter. And so again, we have to circle back, how do we communicate that? We just keep trying to do. But we are doing a tremendous effort.
Thank you. Brooke,
Yeah.
Matt.
Yeah, so the one thing Mike didn't mention is multilingual access. Oh, every survey the town does now goes out in Spanish and Portuguese, as well as English. That are our two largest second languages spoken here. And I think, to Mary's point, we just need to build a culture where people who have been historically underrepresented begin to understand that we want to hear their voice. And I think over time, continuing to do that. And I just want to share that Charles, who's the NCTV government, the person who works on government services for NCTV, has worked in a number of communities, smaller and larger than Nantucket. And he said he has never seen the level of engagement with our YouTube videos and community meeting on YouTube. Like the number of people who watch is far and above anything he's ever seen anywhere. And still, we're missing something. And I think to Mary's point, and I think some of the metrics that Florence is getting will help us target the choices we make and the investments we make in terms of outreach to the ones that are most utilized. So it's a good investment.
Matt,
It was covered.
covered. John,
Yeah, no, Libby mentioned, is there an idea, and I'm going to throw out an idea. We're all involved in meetings and sub-meetings and different boards, and if you look at the planning board, we have the Economic Development Commission, we have the CPC, we have the Affordable Housing Trust, we have coastal resiliency, we have appointments for each of those. So there are so many individual meetings, and that's just one particular board, but when you look at all the boards, the select board, the finance committee, the Conservation Foundation, the HDC, everybody is usually within a board of that. So it's possible for the public to attend all these meetings. Absolutely possible. But just as noted today, we have a bunch of different boards and appointments and volunteers here that we're discussing a broad range. And Libby does this very well with the update that she does with the select board on a weekly basis. She has her morning meeting and you listen to summaries. So what if we had a summary meeting once a month? You didn't have to have the chair of the board attend, but you had volunteers from each board attend when they could to give an update. So we do a great job with outreach, and as Mary says, we're not deficient in the information that we do, but accessibility, some people just cannot attend all these boards. But if there was one meeting once a month to summarize all the boards, it might engage a little bit more with the public. That being said, I give you an example. When our kids were in the school system, there was an open house for the teachers and their grade. It seemed like everybody that was attending were the kids that didn't really need the help. So it's very difficult with attending all these different meetings when you're working 3 jobs just to pay your rent. So to consolidate it into one day with all different boards, such as we're doing right now, I think it might be a possibility that you would get a lot of volunteers.
all right. Eric.
I just wanted to say one thing. I know that some people are thinking about moving into full in-person meetings, going away from electronic remote meetings. There's been some hesitation for hybrid meetings, but no matter what, your meeting should be recorded so that they can be put on YouTube and so that people can watch them from home at another time. I'm a huge proponent of hybrid. I think we do it every week at the select board. It works really well. But going back to John's point about people working 3 jobs, they don't have time to go to meetings, but they can watch them.
Thank you. Over here.
I just wanted to, and I'm not sure where a representative town meeting stands, community-wide, but it seems like it could be a useful tool for the efficiency of some of the reasons we did.
A couple more, yeah. Go ahead.
I kind of want to follow on that. Someone had brought up an idea about town meeting. I don't know if it's possible, but can you have, because we have some slow participation and, until or if or when we have a changing form of government, gotta operate with the one we have. And is it possible to have a day or where you have a debate day and then you go back and then you vote later? Is there any way that way you don't sit there for 8 hours, 12 hours, 2 days, but they could watch the debate on YouTube? If you want to come in and have a comment, I mean, it's an outlier of an idea, but it might be less intimidating to some people.
So a couple other hands. I think Seth, you were raising your hand. Anybody else over here? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly on Erica's point, I think the ability to have recorded meetings is awesome. You know, I can't watch every board, but sometimes when I'm interested in attending or viewing a meeting that I can attend, I watch it on double speed on my computer half the time. It's great. But I want to talk about, you know, another thing that I think is missing from this conversation. It's not related to any of my boarding agents, but it's related to myself as a person. I think people in my age range are very disillusioned with government. It's not just local government, it's state government, national government, everything. And, you know, this is just anecdotally, I'm sure that town administration and town communication department might have data on how we're reaching that group. But I see, you know, when I attend these meetings or boards or a town meeting, consistently being one of the youngest people there, or consistently being one of the youngest people actively engaging in the conversation. And I think that we need to do a better job. You know, once you turn 18, you're eligible and become a registered voter, you're eligible to participate in any of these boards. But if you look historically, how many people between, I would say 18 and 30 that we actually have on committees, I would say it's probably very low. And we need to do a much better job engaging that group of people. Yes, people have work and people have lives and might be logistically more difficult than people in other age ranges. But if we don't do that, then we're setting our town up for failure. When these people get older, they're not going to know the process, they're not going to care about the process, and they're not going to engage then. So we need to target people younger to get them engaged in the process.
Bring your friends.
I try, but no one's interested.
I said that I think that voter turnout among your age group is the highest it's ever been nationally.
Yeah.
Okay. You're not alone on this issue in terms of public participation or engagement, like we hear it every community that we work in. So misery loves company, but we haven't found the silver bullet yet, including a community we worked in 2 weeks ago where they did a door hanger on every single doorknob in town to try to get people out, like the town.
And mailed a survey to every resident, and we still had people show up and say that there wasn't enough outreach.
Yeah. So that's just a statement of today.
Very.
Can we move into quality life? Oh, Barry. Are you
The
there?
hazards of muting. I'll try to be very quick here. I would definitely support Libby and the town in trying to increase whatever we can do in the communications department. It's a sorely needed aspect nowadays. Maybe some thoughts here are to engage a survey analyst, someone who's used to doing surveys, and see if there are other strategies that we can adopt to try to increase the responsiveness to the surveys we send out. Certainly multilingual is a great idea, but maybe there are other ways to incentivize people to do surveys for us as well too, so we can get good feedback on a broader base of what's going on with the community. The other thing too is, I think with the communications department, there's a section that needs to be there to kind of deal with the negative external public relations that goes on in the community at times. And a lot of this is based not through the newspapers, like we said, but through social media. And that's where we need someone who can be on top of those channels and begin to make determinations of, is this just 3 people talking about something, or is it a group we need to be more concerned with? And also, how do we combat that information which may be erroneous or trying to serve a specific target in nature? But that has to be done in a very timely fashion as well too. You can't be waiting a week or 2 later and say, oh yeah, I guess we should have addressed that somehow. So I think in the communications department, that would be another targeted area I would try to look seriously at. Thank you.
The fifth and final area in the strategic plan is quality of life, and certainly everything you'll talk about today touches on what it's like to live here and that experience. Is there any specific comments that any of the boards or committees want to make? Yes, Malcolm.
Yeah, I need some clarification. I guess it's the only Board of Health member here. I'm representing the Board of Health. This last goal, evaluate opportunities, promote healthy living and so forth. What are we doing? I mean, it's a nice statement, but I mean, we do have some significant issues on this island. Mental health issues, drug addiction. Mostly done by the hospital or private institutions. What is the town doing?
Well, yeah, just gonna say, one thing we're doing is, the Human Services Director is participating in the Behavioral Health Initiative. And, I think we have a volunteer, position funded for fiscal 24 that involves, putting volunteers together to help with some aspects of that. We maybe need to step it up a little, I guess, among, all the other things we need to step up, but.
What you added positions, I mean, in recreation that had been gone and came back, and there's been some other funding around improving ball fields and making, even bike paths in terms of things to make things more accessible for more people in terms of recreation. Those few. I'm gonna grab Don, she's been quiet, and then I'll come over to Mary. And someone behind me, sorry, Christy, I got you, Don.
Well, we do provide funding every year specifically for human services, a fair amount of funding. But I think that some of the things that we're starting to really talk about are more access to year-round recreation, more access to healthy things. Rather, yes, we do have a big substance abuse problem on this island. And a lot of it is because people are bored. And that's what they're doing in the winter when they have nothing else to do. And there has to be more initiative from the early stages, and they have been doing that at the schools.
Mary.
I have a different.
Okay, I was just to touch on that and say the select board doubled the funding to the human services. And that's what go to the nonprofit organizations that are doing the work.
Mary, Jimmy, and John.
So I want to talk about a healthcare crisis that doesn't get any attention. And that is the lack of accessibility of basic medical care, primary care, dental care, vision care. It's all 3 months out or more just to get an appointment. And I really, that's not within the town's, scope of authority to provide medical care. And it's a national issue. But I would really like to see some examination of what can we possibly do to get more primary care providers on the island or available to the islanders. It's, it doesn't help us to have to wait for so long to get basic medical attention.
Anna, and then, I just wanted to say, I serve on the contract review committee. This year we had $875,000 to give away, and the competition for that is, significant. And though that money is all invested in programs to support mental health of island residents, and then we asked for $175,000 more to help talk about wellness and substance misuse, as we call it these days. And we are in the thick of that program. And to Dawn's point, we really have gone out of the box and looked for solutions that were collaborations of island organizations who had teamed up, and in most cases, actually, for anyone who's ultimately going to get the money, they have to have a proposal where there is a behavioral health person and some type of recreational program or some type of outreach in the community where someone can get help that is not in a traditional way. And one of the reasons that group, I think, felt so strongly about that is that the town has supported, I'm just going to use Health Imperatives as an example, for a number of years, and Health Imperatives have done an exceptional job of reaching the underserved communities, whether it's via communication or via the disbursement of help, right? So we are trying to piggyback on some of those real success stories and let people who have not traditionally had access to these types of programs, one, come and propose a program for their community. But the act of going through all this was completely educational for me, because one of the things I learned was that, for example, there's a Ruffin pool
that you can reach out to and get all the emails and connect with that community. And there are other underserved groups, so there are ways to connect with. Thank you. Chris.
I just wanted to compliment public, private, and nonprofit for providing a tremendous amount of opportunity for residents and our summer visitors to keep busy with healthy, educational, cultural items, and not to mistaken someone that just chooses to stay in and watch TV all day and be bored because they're not motivating themselves. So there is, and maybe that comes down to some of the, social services part of it, but, I just want to make a point to compliment that I think there is a tremendous amount of things to do out here. And it does take self-motivation to not be bored, to not, dive deep into, a bad place. So it's a great place to be and there's plenty to do.
Brooke, and then here, I'm sorry.
So I'm gonna go in a couple of different directions. In terms of human services, I think that a comprehensive needs assessment for the community is overdue. And I think in part that's because the Council for Human Services was not peopled for a long time. And I think that reviewing the intersection of Council for Human Services, the contract review process, and collaboration with the nonprofit sector, private nonprofit sector in human services is going to be integral. And I'm working on this in my private life as well as from this select board perspective. So more comprehensive assessment of and gap assessment and so forth. And then another area that hasn't been really talked about, and Malcolm, because you're on the Board of Health, is health code enforcement in housing. And I think it's been, it's something that we feared tackling as a community because of the potential economic impact, the human impact of actual enforcement, making people homeless. And I think now that we're poised to make some serious inroads, we have the funding to make some serious inroads on the housing, the creation of housing units. I see it as a critical imperative that we build a strategy to improve the enforcement of our health code, occupancy limits in housing, so that we're not just taking people out of bad situations, putting them in good situations and creating a vacuum where people just go back into the same situations. And there needs to be a strategy, and I'd love to see the Board of Health and the Health and Human Services Department take this on as a major project, so that people know it's coming, that we have the resources to fix substandard housing through microloans in exchange for year-round deed restrictions on rentals. There's programs we can do to and this really became clear to a lot of people who volunteered in COVID as to how our community members are living. And I cannot tell you to deliver groceries to a basement bulkhead and find there's 2 families living there with 0 egress and inadequate plumbing. And we are one step away from some major disasters in terms of people's lives here. And I can't in good conscience as a select board member continue to allow this to happen without us starting now to develop a strategy to fix it.
Yes.
This was sort of going back to what everyone else said, I think I tied in that I heard the other day that actually the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And I thought that was a really good statement because people are addicts. I think they're trying to avoid and get away from things and numb themselves and just, kind of tune like that. And actually it's bringing them with the community that gets them connected. And that's why it's been important to me. And I know everyone in this room is going to hear me say it. We need some sort of indoor community center, let's call it. It could to include recreation. Maybe there's other things that would go on there. But I think it's really important. I think it would also be a wonderful galvanizing thing for the town because not only would it be popular amongst everybody, but it's something that brings everyone together just to work on it to make it happen. We have to get the mental health services involved in this. We have to get all the select board involved. I mean, every committee has to get involved to make something like that happen. And I know that's a big undertaking, but I really hope people will start really putting this in their minds and talking about it because that is where you're gonna get the people in their twenties to come. That's how I met so many people in their twenties is, playing racket sports. And they are coming, they will come, but I can't make them serve on a board, but I can meet them there and I can talk to them now about, hey, maybe one day you will have time to serve on a board, which is what we do. So that's why it's super important to me. And
Thank you, Andrew.
I think what people are talking about, I think is really what the focus should be on quality of life. And I think the way this is written, that the school needs some work. I think there's some odd focus in here, sort of trends towards, away from the broader inclusive, I think, of this. I mean, specifically reference middle income jobs as opposed to all jobs, and to reference things like rural identity. I think this goal could use some work by the select board to kind of match what everybody is saying in more intuitive way.
And then Malcolm, back to you. You opened this can.
No, I agree with Andrew said. I think we need to work on this. It's just not, it's too general. And just to reinforce with Brooke, like about 13 years on the Board of Health, the thing that always upset me was every now and then we'd condemn a house because there were 10 people living in the basement. And you had to do that. But then you say to yourself, okay, where are those 10 people going to go? To the next house that we're going to condemn. So it is a major issue. And I think the Board of Health and the Select Board need to focus more on this.
Yeah, this is a great segue into the final question. I'll grab another comment.
I just wanted to make the point, the other thing that I haven't heard yet is really the cost of goods and services. I mean, if things are so high and out of reach because they're priced at population levels that people are going to do less. They're not going to go to movies. They're not going to go to programs that might cost. They're not going to buy certain things that they want. They're not going to go to eat as a family. So the cost of goods and services is a major component to quality of life.
I've debated on where to bring this up this morning, but I think an important piece that touches on housing and transportation, and Libby, you touched briefly on potential for a need for a new school, is just what community we're trying to plan for. When you're thinking 20 years out, how many people are we trying to accommodate for? You can't right size a transportation system unless you have that number in mind. You don't know what the school system needs to look like. School's a whole nother issue that probably deserves some mention today, is improving the quality of the education that we provide here. But really, for me, the overarching thing that helps, it's the principal thing where if we could get some agreement on, do we want to be a 25,000 person year-round community or a 50,000 person year-round community, then you can start to address what types of housing initiatives we need to pursue, what types of transportation we need, all those sorts of things.
Barry has his.
Okay, you two have your hands up, and then Barry, and then I need to move this along. So I'm going to try to do that.
I'm just gonna say something real quick. If we could agree on what size, how do we keep us from growing past that?
Zoning's a big way.
Right.
So-
I
for
put it out,
instance-
I don't want to debate it, but that is the burning question, right?
I'll do it quickly.
Sure.
Listening to all this, we've sort of prioritized housing as first. But I think this last one, the quality of life, is really our priority. Because it really encompasses all the others: environment, transportation, housing, efficient town. That should really be our number one priority.
That's the next conversation we'll be having with the select board. Barry.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just want to put a different spin on things here for a moment, and I might reach in and grab my pharmacist hat that I still wear every so often. I think there needs to be a recognition that although it's a very noble cause, you're not going to address every social ill that occurs. There are certain things we can enter into and do it successfully, and there are other things that may be beyond our scope or reach, depending upon what services need to be provided and the cost of those services as well too. But I dare say I don't want to look at the glass is being half empty here for what the town does. I just started listing off some things very quickly. I mean, we've done some incredible things with our housing initiatives that are going on here. Our recreation plan is starting to look solid again. Human Services is back online, and I agree with Brooke that it would be good to get them to do another study at this point. But that's great to have it, and I think Jericho is trying to do an incredibly good job there. You have a resource, which is the CPC, which deals with things like open space, recreation, and affordable housing as well too. You have something like the Salt Marsh, again, trying to take care of our seniors. You also have our Island Home, which is an incredible testament to what this community does for our infirm seniors as well too. There's a lot of things I think we're doing positive. We may not be able to fix everything, but I think what we need to do is focus on some of these areas and try to make sure that we're providing those best services possible. The other thing I think you need to recognize too is that there's been a fundamental shift in the way people engage. Between the internet nowadays, cable TV, and the whole idea that COVID took 2 years out of our life and drove us back into our homes. We learned how to telecommute. So we need to also, I think, recognize what came out of those circumstances as well too. And we're still re-emerging from that as well. So there has to be that perspective levied into that equation as well too when we talk about quality of life. We need to keep current with the times and maybe not look backwards in time and try to apply that, but find what the new norm is and begin to adopt to that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've kind of talked about the priorities that the board has had, made mention of some of the things they've done that have been successful and all the things that you all are working on. Frankly, most of it seems to be very supportive and good, the tension is not something specific on any given initiative. So I feel that that's all headed in the right direction. But what's next? And that's where, the board will be having a strategic planning session in October. What are some things that you all want them to consider in terms of potential priorities in the next iteration of this strategic plan? And so we'll try to do this quickly, maybe just name it without trying to sell it so much, and then we can see if we can get to everybody and get out of here. So, yes, Mary.
I think we need to start thinking sort of one step beyond and asking what happens when we achieve our goals. I thank you for Stephen and Brooke for touching on this at the end of the last section. But if we solve problems, are we simply inviting more people to come and take advantage of the newly created resources? If we don't start thinking about, when this problem is solved, what problems are created, or how will people react when we provide them with new resources? If we can think a step ahead, I think we will be better served. All of the problems that we've talked about are less severe when there are fewer people here. And all of the problems that we've talked about, even if we solve them, we'll have new problems if there are more people. And that's something we just need to keep in the back of our minds at all times.
I get it, Joanna.
I was gonna say something similar to Mary. I think agreeing on the size and looking at zoning is a critical priority. And I also think that looking ahead at the form of town government is a critical priority, because instead of reacting to things that have been proposed, planning for what any type of transition or what an alternative is, or why it wouldn't be the best choice for us. So I think looking at that issue is really important.
I was just gonna say, with capital planning, looking even beyond 10 years out and just thinking what things future boards and committees and generations will be thanking us that we did have the forethought to do.
I would just say define success. I don't know that there's a success metric for any of these 5 areas that we talked about. So you don't know what we're trying to achieve or attain.
Julie, can I didn't realize this was coming up like this. This is where we sort of now back to the beginning of the meeting. So, you know,
Full circle.
full circle. So this whole who's here, too many, not enough. The whole 100,000 thing, which was made up. All you have to do is talk to Dave Monass. How many trucks come a day to Stop and Shop in the last 10 years? There's not more than that many people yet. Than was before. It's about 50,000, 55. Otherwise, Stop and Shop would have 10 trailers a day. Period. Then everybody goes spotless to go for everything. That doesn't happen. So I just do simple things. Okay. So what Mary and Joanna just talked about. Go back to what Brooke talked about with, and I hate saying this word, but I've accustomed myself to saying it, housing inventory. Oh, sounds like we're talking about cows or, you know, corn and beans on the shelf and milk. And it's sort of weird to talk about it that way, but it is true. So if you have X number of year-round dwellings that you know a year-round, we know because of the residential exemption. We have all this data. It's just never been calculated the way we're talking about now. We have 3 different ways to be a local: street list, residential exemption, and voting. And they're all different. Okay, so the number of people is based on how many beds there are. Like, people aren't sleeping on the beach. This isn't the 60s. Okay, where we had a lot of things going on here that we'd be really upset with now. And you know, it's based on bedrooms. Okay. How many year-round bedrooms do you want versus how many seasonal? That's really where it is. And it's never going to be, as Steve said, there's not going to be, okay, we're finished. This isn't going to be like the pressure main. When that project is done, it's over. It's going to be working for hundreds of years because it's forever. So, but this is never going to end. This is going to be a continuous discussion for decades until, I don't know, whatever happens to us in 100 years. We go underwater, or, I mean, you listen to everybody, we might as well have an evacuation plan added to the list. So I don't know, because I don't see Nantucket as a it's more of a door that opens. It's like a turnstile. You go to the game and you come back from the game. Like, people aren't filling up Nantucket. It just seems that way when you're driving around the same streets all the time. So we've already preserved the island. There's no more land. 65% of the island's untapped. There is not going to be a building boom of like doubling the number of houses, but the infill discussion is going to be the biggest thing we have. Once that comes out, and people get scared and jump out of their chairs when they see that, that's because of what Brooke mentioned. Other communities don't have second dawns. They certainly don't have tertiaries. We do. So there's a lot of by right building that can happen. What we need to be focused on is how do we get it to the year round?
Yeah.
That's the key. So there you go. There's not really going to be an end to this. This is really just the beginning now, actually.
Other priorities for the future. Yes, Andrew.
I think infrastructure, management and investment are gonna become much more important in the next round of the board strategic thinking, where they're going to have to really follow through on some of the things like the road takings, road investments, and managing RTA and RTA.
Just real quick, can I just say one thing? I don't want to, but I want to say something. I just thought of.
We have a choice.
Matt brought something up earlier about connecting, and it just popped into my head. Love is lane. Now, Julia, before you got here, which is not that long ago, just 2015, if somebody said we're going to pave Love is Lane in 2015, you would have been all the way to the wherever. Now everybody's in agreement with it. How did that happen? It took a long time to get people to agree that yes, Love is Lane improved. Okay. When that road gets done and there's a bike path and the water gets, directed so it's not flooding people's houses, you're going to see a major change in what Matt was talking about. People are going to be able to take a different route to get somewhere. Okay, whether they're going to the south side of the island or not. So when I first got involved at the beginning, the biggest issue was Monahantet Boulevard and Aqua. There were, how many people ran for selectmen that wanted to have roads fixed? I mean, quite a few. That was like the number one thing. Gotta fix those roads. Well, they weren't ours. And when I found out school buses didn't go down there to pick kids up, I didn't even know that was not happening, okay? Now, those roads are taken. I know, I gotta go. Those roads are taken and they're gonna get improved, but look at how long it takes. That's a good example of all these things we're talking about.
Thanks a lot.
I just wanted to go back to the way we created the strategic plan from the beginning was to be an evolving 3-year plan with some very specific goals. And we revisit it every year to reprioritize those goals, to check off, this is what we have accomplished. What has maybe risen up above something else? And I mean, I would use like housing as an example. We've done very well being in safe harbor. But so much of that is centered around rental. And that I think that one of the things we really need to talk about in our next session, people want to realize home ownership. And yes, it has to be restricted, it has to be subsidized, but it is a much different quality of life to have that. So that's just one example.
So home ownership is a town employee retention strategy, right? You can build a bunch of rentals for new town employees, but when people partner up and have families, if we're gonna keep them, they want to be able to buy a house. I hear it all the time, and that's true for all employees, but particularly as a recruitment and retention strategy. Recruitment at the higher levels, professionals at department head level who own a home somewhere else won't come here if they can't match that opportunity, and people won't stay as they work their way up through the ranks. So it's a critical part of our town infrastructure.
Somebody online wants, Barry, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. You know, when we do this analysis too, you've got to be cognizant of the fact, sometimes we don't know if there's a problem until we start using it and encountering it. For instance, PFAS, if you go back, that didn't become an issue till 2016. PFAS was recognized before that as being an okay product to use. We had CF bulbs that you used in your house that was supposed to be the next revolution in lighting, and all of a sudden it was like, oh no, they're hazardous. And oh, by the way, LED replaced the technology. We look at trying to do electric use on the island and this conversion to everything being electric. But we also need to, I don't think we've counterbalanced yet the fact that the more electricity this island utilizes, there's probably going to be a need for a third or maybe even a fourth cable, depending upon its utilization statistics. We need to look at that as well too. Housing, another issue as well. You know, right now we're faced with the aftermath of the baby boomer population, but if you look, that population is slowly declining. And I've seen statistics for nursing homes, for instance, for residential uses, where 20, 30 years out, what you're doing now may not be needed and becomes obsolete in time. So the focal point that I think we should be looking at collectively as a group is to, one, look at this new decennial census that came out. The first time I read a decennial census, I was floored by looking at what the future had in store, because it not only predicted and tried to analyze what the size of populations were in certain areas, but fundamental shifts as well too in what constituted that population. So I think for us, going and starting with maybe that as the benchmark, And when we do that, what we may also want to do too is set a benchmark at time with where we want to be. Using that census to say, okay, there's short-term things we need to address, there's long-term things, and what are the ramifications of the short-term actions that we do today? And that to me is even more important in terms of just looking at the short-term analysis of what's really going on. So I'd encourage us to be, and I see this up here too, where we're looking 20, 30 years out as well, and try to counterbalance the two. May not be able to solve everything. We may leave some things behind in the dust. But on the other side of the coin, you don't want to be looking back like we have with other things, you know, and said, oh yeah, 20, 30 years ago, we should have done this, this, and this. We need to, I think, you know, with all that, we need to maybe take a little bit more proactive role in that. So that's where I'd suggest we start. Thank you.
All right, we are close to our end time, and I do want to get you out of here on time so you can breathe some different air. It's a little, yeah, it's just the outside. And so we'll just close with a quick word, and your word can be just a summary of how you sense today went, or your word for the future, whatever your word is. Dawn, I always say chair gets to go first or last. What are you gonna choose today?
I want to go loud.
You're gonna go last. Tom, new guy, sorry.
Collaborative.
Collaborative, thank you.
Process management.
I didn't listen to the instructions.
One word,
Productive.
hopeful.
Encouraging and positive.
Let's leave it to Nat, 2 words.
Seriously, I think-
Leslie said positive.
Skip on it. Educational, patience,
Optimistic. Brian,
encouraging. Adaptable.
ready, Andrew? No, we can't put that, Mary. Long range plan. Andrew is speechless.
Casting.
Forecasting, collaboration, let's see, I'm gonna go over to Seth.
Energizing.
A lot more issues than I thought.
Okay, that was a good word.
Overdue.
Overdue,
Helpful.
helpful,
I have 6, but I would say helpful.
helpful. I need to go to TV land, Barry,
Visionary.
Joe. Joseph, I'm out,
There we go. So folks, stay focused.
stay focused. Erica, help me out. Linda.
You-
Next. Okay, and then Andrew. Oh, Mike Burns. Mike Burns.
I
I'm
gotta pick a
trying, by the
word.
way.
I'll say stewardship.
Thank you. Andrew, you ready?
Complex.
Complex. Libby,
I agree with helpful.
helpful, and Dawn.
I'm thinking inclusive.
All right, it's 11:59. I'm gonna give you a minute back. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we got to figure out the air quality.